Okay, well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's Rushcliffe Borough Council Planning Committee meeting. I'd like to remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. A recording of the meeting will be available afterwards on the Council's YouTube channel. In addition, under the Local Authorities, Executive Arrangements, Meetings and Access to Information England Regulations 2012, other people may film, record, post on social media or blog from this meeting. The use of any such images or sound recordings is not under the Council's control. May I remind councillors to please switch your microphones off when you're not speaking. So thank you. So good evening. I'm Councillor Richard Butler, the Chairman of the committee. Councillor Tony Wells is Vice Chairman, and officers with us this evening is Helen Knott, who is a Service Manager for Planning, Emily Dodd, Planning Manager Development, Matthew Hilton, Senior Planning Officer, Paul Taylor, Strategic Site Delivery Officer, and Alison Walker, who is the Borough Solicitor. I'd like to move on to the first item on the agenda now, which is apologies for absence, please.
We have apologies from Councillor Parek, and Councillor S. Ellis is substituting.
Thank you. And item 2, now declarations of interest. I know that we will have a couple of this evening, so Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I declare a non-pecuniary interest in the item pertaining land of the east of Gypsum Way in Gotham. I won't be participating in the discussion or decision.
Thank you. And Councillor Brown.
And exactly the same as Councillor Walker.
Thank you. And so we go on to, so at those items, you'll stand out for those items. And on item 3, we have minutes of the previous meeting held on the 11th of April. Are we all happy that those are correct? So I'll sign them. What's the date today? It's the 9th, isn't it? 9th. Caught up in the chair. All right. So we now move on to the main reason we're here this evening, and that is to discuss this evening's planning applications. And the first item for Councillor Walker and Councillor Brown to just momentarily step away is land east of Gypsum Way, Gotham. And this is the residential development of 96 dwellings with associated infrastructure, access and areas of open space at land east of Gypsum Way, Gotham. And Mr. Taylor, if you'd like to talk us through this, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Members are advised that there are late representations for this application as set out in the papers you should have before you. There is also a late rep, Chairman, which I will take members through verbally as well, but I'll guide members through the one in the paper first, if I may.
You may. Can I just confirm that members have received that late representation, seen it, and yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So the representation you have written copies of is a clarification point from the agent on behalf of the applicants. Members, in reading the report, may well have noticed that one of the objections received from a resident was in relation to a claim that they have a right of way across the site. The agent has come back disputing that. They've checked legally on land registry and on other records, and they state that there is no right of access by any third parties across the site. There's certainly no public right of way. What I can clarify, Chair, is ultimately, regardless of what that situation is, that would be a private matter, a civil matter between the individual and the landowner or owners in question. The late rep, or the late rep, if I can refer to it that, is in relation to proposed condition 2 within the recommendation for the report, which is a condition relating to approved plans. Some of the house type numbers, some developers describe their house types as the Winchester or the Chichester, they give them a name. Others choose to give them a code, a series of letters and numbers. So it might be JG96/4. The applicant uses the latter format. Some of those numbers have changed. So I have received an updated house pack with the correct numbers, references to the properties that have been uploaded onto the website. But as a result, the date as stated within condition 2 would need to change to reflect that updated drawing schedule should members be minded to resolve to grant the planning permission. So if I can move to the map. The application seeks full planning permission for the erection of 96 dwellings with associated works, including drainage, open space, landscaping and access. So we have an aerial photograph of the red line on the plan showing the outline of the site, which correlates with that plan, perhaps slightly easier to see in this room with the lighting chair. Members will see the application site is in a regular shape. It's located to the southern end of the village of Gotham. The site is not within a conservation area, and the nearest listed building sits within the neighbouring bus depot, which is to the northeast corner of the site. So the nearest listed building is outside of the application site. Members are also advised that there is a significant area of the site which is identified as being at high risk from surface water flooding, although the applicant has already undertaken works on site to help mitigate some of those impacts on the existing residential properties. The site comprises a former plant nursery, 2 fields and 4 residential properties. And as you'll see from the plan in front of you, there's sort of 2 fields largely located on an east-west axis. There are 2 properties on the frontage of the site, and there are 2 properties within the site. There is a gradual slope rising from east to west across the site, and the boundaries are delineated by a series of trees and hedgerows. Several buildings and structures associated with the former nursery site are still present within the application area itself, and there is a beech tree located behind 88 Leek Road, which is alongside the access to the site that is protected by a tree preservation order. To the north of the site, the application site adjoins open land beyond which are residential properties on Pygall Avenue, Hall Drive and Monks Lane, and you can see them to the immediate north on the plan in front of you. To the east is the aforementioned former bus depot and the properties that front onto Leek Road. To the south is a bungalow, 108A Leek Road and open land, and to the west is a belt of woodland planting on the former railway line that is now a local wildlife site. This separates the site from Gypsum Way, which is slightly further to the west and just off the side of the image. The site is an allocated site, members, within Local Plan Part 2 under Policy 9 for around 70 dwellings. The application before you proposes the erection of 96 new dwellings, along with the demolition of the 2 detached properties that are alongside the applications, alongside the site entrance, as well as the demolition of 2 properties within the site. The proposal would therefore result in a net gain of 92 dwellings on the site. The proposal includes a mix of housing, including 2-bed bungalows, along with 2, 3, 4 and 5 bedroom houses, a play area, informal open space, an ecological area to the western edge of the site, and sustainable drainage features, including a pumping station. Acoustic fencing to the neighbouring bus depot is also proposed. The application has attracted objections from residents, the parish council and both ward members, and they predominantly relate to concerns of flooding, the level of development proposed and parking concerns. The proposal requires the raising of land levels across the site to address the risk of surface water flooding, with adjustments also required for climate change. The submission included a flood risk assessment, which has been assessed by the lead local flood authority, whom are not objecting to the proposal, subject to the suggested condition attached to the recommendation. The proposed SUDS, sustainable drainage system, are in the form of attenuation feature, swales, tree pits and other measures, and are considered to mitigate the risk of flooding. Similarly, Severn Trent Water have been consulted and they do not object to the proposal. It's perhaps worth reminding members that any developer is required to go through a separate process outside of planning to connect to existing sewage infrastructure and to have any new foul drainage adopted by Severn Trent Water. The application also proposes a pumping station, which the applicant advised allows flexibility in the level of the sewer pipe when leaving the site to allow foul drainage to be designed to avoid existing drainage within Leek Road, therefore minimising the effect on brick culvert that have been highlighted an area of concern by the community. The requirement to raise levels across the site, however, has resulted in issues of viability. I'm aware that members have received a briefing note on viability, as it's not a matter that occurs on a regular basis for planning applications. The applicants provided a financial viability assessment and that was independently scrutinised by the council, for the council, by a suitably qualified expert. This was a lengthy process, taking almost 18 months to complete, but concluded that for the applicant to make an acceptable level of profit, there was not enough money in the scheme to cover all the Section 106 requests and for them to deliver a policy compliant development. The council's advisor agreed that to make the scheme viable, the level of affordable housing would need to be reduced from a 30% provision to 6.5%, or in housing numbers, a reduction from 28 affordable units to just 9. Officers appreciate that that is not ideal. However, the wording of Local Plan Part 1 Policy 8, which deals with affordable housing, does allow for a reduction in affordable housing, provided that reduction has been demonstrated and assessed. Officers advise that that has occurred. And therefore, the viability appraisal and the resultant reduction in affordable housing is not disputed by officers. Therefore, whilst the provision of affordable housing is not policy compliant, i.e. it's not 30% on this site, it nevertheless does comply with the affordable housing policy. Officers acknowledge that 96 dwellings is greater than the around 70 figure as stated in the policy. However, Policy 9 does not state that that figure is a maximum. Paragraph 74 of the report before members this evening does clarify that despite housing numbers stated for all allocated sites within the Local Plan Part 2, final numbers of dwellings on the allocated sites should be established at the planning application stage following consideration of site-specific detailed designs, matters and other relevant planning considerations. The scheme before members tonight would result in a density of 35 dwellings to the hectare, which is considered acceptable for a village location whilst making an efficient use of land. The proposed properties would have suitably sized gardens, access to open space on site, and acceptable separation distances from existing dwellings and between the new dwellings proposed to protect residential amenity. It should also be acknowledged that colleagues in environmental health are not objecting, subject to conditions being attached to any favourable recommendation. The proposed widened access facilitated through the demolitions of numbers 90 and 92 Leek Road also requires the provision of visibility displays at that junction. Currently, most of the properties along Leek Road are reliant on on-street parking. The required visibility displays would reduce the level of on-street parking available and is proposed to be enforced through double yellow lines, which is a process outside of the planning system. To compensate for the loss, the application proposes provision of 14 displaced parking spaces based on 2 spaces per property to the rears of 82 to 88 and 94 to 98 Leek Road. This is a requirement of the policy and has been assessed by the Highway Authority as part of the wider proposal. Despite raising initial concerns, the Highway Authority have now advised that all of their issues have been addressed and they are not objecting to the proposal, and officers consider that the application is not an overdevelopment of the site, nor would it significantly impact on amenity of existing residents or result in highway safety concerns subject to the proposed conditions in the recommendation. Therefore, when balancing the requirement to make an efficient use of this allocated site and the other identified constraints, officers conclude that the design, layout, parking provision for both existing and new residents and the resultant relationships are acceptable. This is despite the reduction in affordable housing provision, which officers are satisfied has been justified by the financial viability appraisal. The initial concerns raised by technical consultees have been addressed through revisions, and the correspondence received are set out in the agenda papers. Members should note that whilst none of the technical consultees, including the lead local flood authority, Severn Trent Water or the Highway Authority, are objecting to the revised proposal, the ward members, parish council and some residents are. All comments received are summarised in the report and the late reps and can be read in line and full. I'll now take members on a guided tour around and through the site. So this plan that you've got on the screen, I've superimposed into either the bottom left or the bottom right corner of each image with a photograph, because I appreciate navigating around such a large site, not always the easiest thing to convey or to fully understand. So that's an aerial photograph of the site, and you'll see that it's 2 fields largely parallel to one another, with the access point on the eastern edge, which is the frontage onto Leek Road. So this is taken from the end of Hall Drive, I think it's called. I'll just double check. Yes, Hall Drive, looking in a southerly direction towards the site. So the land in front of you is not the application site, it's actually land beyond the boundary that you can see sort of running through the middle of the image. So you can see the separation distance on the plan in the bottom corner. Moving out onto Gypsum Way, which is along the western outer edge of the image, this direction looking south. So the application site behind the hedgerow, broadly in this location here. And at the far end of Gypsum Way, looking back again, the application site on the right-hand side behind the woodland screening. Moving around onto Leek Road. These are the properties on Leek Road that back onto the site. The application entrance site is roughly in this location here, members. And as we move further along, you can see there's an existing vehicular access here, and this is 90 and 92 that are proposed to be demolished to help widen the access to the application site. Moving along that track before us, we get to the top of the track. So you've got the back boundary fences of the properties on Leek Road to the northern side, and this is the beech tree I mentioned that's got the tree preservation order on that. I think with next image we sort of step in just alongside the beech tree. So again, we're looking into the site. This is one of the 2 detached properties within the site that's also proposed to be demolished. And we step forward towards that property, and you can see it's currently not occupied. Next image, we turn to the photographer's right. And again, you can see one of the drainage features, some of the drainage work that the applicant's already undertaken on site to address some of the historic surface water flooding issues that have occurred on site. And again, looking towards the little triangular portion of land with properties on Leek Road to the right-hand side of the image and the bus depot broadly on the left-hand side of this image. I think we step out and turn to the right. So again, this is the beech tree, and this is one of the areas where the proposed displaced parking is proposed to be to the rears of the properties. I think this would be 88 to 9, 84 to 88, I think it was. Again, turning to the photographer's right, we see the access track that we walked up to enter into the site. And again, you can see the rears of the properties on Leek Road. And again, turning right, you see the continuation of the drainage feature that forms part of the application, but has clearly been cleared, managed and maintained by the current landowner. Moving into the area to the frontage of us, again, we see the properties backing onto the site. So these are the properties on Leek Road. And again, turning to our right, looking towards the corner of the site, properties on Leek Road, but we are within the application site as indicated by the arrow in the bottom corner of the image. These are some of the former nursery buildings and structures that still occupy the centre of the southernmost 2 fields of the application site. And we sort of step in behind them, and we can look toward 108A Leek Road, the bungalow that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago that sits outside of the application site. So this is the timber fence is the boundary of the site. This property sits beyond the boundary. These are some of the former nursery buildings. Again, turning 180 degrees, you see some more former growing tunnels, growing beds. Stepping forward, the site opens out slightly, and we're sort of halfway down the site, approximately looking towards Gypsum Way, the hedgerow here. This is the boundary to the neighbouring field that does form part of the application site. I think the images rotate us around slightly to the left from the collection. So again, looking directly towards Gypsum Way, where you can see the taller trees within the image, you get a feeling of sort of the open nature of the application site with the boundary treatment that forms the boundary of the site to the left-hand side of the image. And again, turning to the left, clearer image of that boundary. I think the next photograph jumps us into the neighbouring field, roughly in this location, but the arrows and the plans will confirm that. So again, we are within the northernmost of the 2 fields. You can perhaps just make out the second of the 2 detached dwellings that sit within the site. To the right-hand side of that image, and again we rotate round to the left. So again, looking towards Gypsum Way at the bottom of the site. This is the northern boundary of the site here. Rotating round 180 degrees. This building sits within the neighbouring bus depot, but sits on the boundary line of the application site. So that building is not part of the application, but does form a boundary of the site. And again, we rotate to the photographer's left, and we see a slightly clearer image of one of the 2 properties within the site also proposed to be demolished. And then we step out to the right-hand side of that property, look back towards it, and then step out into the bus depot. So this is the building I've just described within the bus depot that would be retained. This is the first property within the site that I showed you is proposed to be demolished. And this is the little triangular parcel of land. On the next image rotates, just gives a slightly clearer photograph of that triangular parcel of land with the properties on Leek Road backing onto it. Step out. This is the entrance to the neighbouring bus depot, and then photograph just turns us back to our left, and we're back onto Leek Road, looking in a southerly direction, with the application site broadly behind us to our right hand side, and just a photograph slightly further down Leek Road, again with the entrance to the site proposed in this location, roughly where that car's parked, Chairman. Proposed layout for the site. This is sort of the technical drawing that's come in. Perhaps the next image, the coloured up drawing, is perhaps slightly clearer for members to see. So we have the properties on Leek Road on the right hand side of the image. Proposed demolition of the two properties at the entrance with the new access road coming in. The two areas of displaced car parking as proposed. This pair of semi-detached properties here are bungalows backing onto these properties here. This property is a two-storey property side on to this property here. There's the balancing attenuation feature, along with sort of additional drainage proposed within the site that runs either side, sort of wrapping around this protrusion of the neighbouring bus depot and along the southern boundary of the site. Area of open space, proposed pumping station, and then predominantly the residential area as proposed with the layout that members can see on the screen, and then an ecological area that wouldn't be open to the public along the western boundary of the site. Again, just a plan showing, this is the materials plan, so showing the different types of roofing and brick materials that the development's proposed to be. So you can see there's a mixture across the site. And then some images of some of the house types. I've not included them all, Chairman, because there's quite a variety across the site, but this is one of the proposed bungalows, some of the affordable housing, different types of 2-bedroom properties, 3-bedroom properties, a 4-bedroom property, and a 5-bedroom property. So you can see there's a variety of styles and designs and detailing with the images that was proposed, Chairman. So members, the application, I'll remind you, is seeking full planning permission for 96 dwellings on an allocated site on the edge of the village of Gotham. None of the technical consultees are objecting to the proposal, and notably the Highway Authority do not object to the access arrangements or displaced parking, and the League Local Flood Authority and Severn Trent Water are not objecting, despite the site's history of surface water flooding. The design and layout of the site is a direct response to the site's constraints, and officers are satisfied that the proposal is in accordance with the policies in the local plan, subject to conditions set out in the report, and are recommending approval on that basis. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Very detailed report there. We have 3 speakers on this item, so I will invite them to come to the table now to talk to us. The first is Mr. Gore, who is the applicant's agent. So welcome to the meeting. You have up to 5 minutes to talk to us. If you're still speaking at 4.5, we'll tell you there's 30 seconds left, and then we have to ask you to stop at 5 minutes. So as soon as you're ready, you can address the committee.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee as well for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'd like to start by saying that the extent of time, effort, cost, and most importantly, care and attention that's gone into this scheme that you see before you tonight is extensive, to say the least, and has spanned nearly 7 years. Engagement with Gotham Parish Council and the local community started way back in 2019 and continued through the examination of the Gotham Neighbourhood Plan, the examination of the Rushcliffe Local Plan Part 2, and through the planning application itself. Davidson's used this engagement process to genuinely listen and address feedback provided by local residents and by parish councillors, even to the extent of visiting a number of specific properties on Leek Road to talk through the remodelling of their back gardens in order to provide safe and attractive access to new off-street parking being provided for the residents as part of the development. Davidson's also spent significant time and money without having the comfort of planning permission in place on investigating surface water flooding issues in the village. At their own expense, Davidson's carried out exploratory works on the existing drainage network around Leek Road, and then identified and corrected the issue through the provision of new drainage infrastructure. Again, all of this without having the comfort of planning permission in place. This approach is exceptionally rare, and the development itself, once in place, will deliver further surface water drainage betterment to the Leek Road area. In stark contrast to the perception that many communities and councillors have of the house building industry, Davidson's aim to leave a legacy of well-designed homes and streets, genuine community engagement, and well thought through, usable, meaningful and attractive public spaces. The scheme before you tonight has done planning in the right way. The principle of developing the site has been assessed through the local plan and the neighbourhood plan making processes, and has therefore been endorsed by officers, by inspectors, and then ultimately by members too, through the adoption of the respective local and neighbourhood plans. The scheme before you tonight is therefore an allocated site and one that the council now relies upon as part of its housing delivery. The layout and design of the scheme has also been the subject of a number of years' worth of engagement with statutory consultees on all of the normal technical matters, as well as with council's planning and housing officers, who have been extremely thorough in their determination of this application, seeking to ensure that the application is reported to this committee only when all matters have been dealt with satisfactorily. We therefore strongly urge members to endorse the recommendation of their officers tonight and approve this allocated and well-designed scheme by one of the region's best house builders. Just one final point of clarification. I think Mr. Taylor referenced 6 affordable dwellings on the site. I believe we've got 9. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well within 5 minutes, so thank you for that. Our next speaker on this is from Gotham Parish Council, Mr. Lewis Macaulay. If you'd like to join the table, thank you. Welcome. Pardon? Yeah. It could be hay fever. It could be hay fever. I know I'm struggling a bit today as well. But, so, as before, up to 5 minutes. And if you're still speaking at 4.5, we'll tell you there's 30 seconds left. So as soon as you're ready, press the right button and the red light will come on.
Lewis Macaulay, Gorton Parish Council Chairman, represent the objection on behalf of Gorton Parish Council. We object to this application on the following grounds. In reference to the drainage addendum document dated the 3rd of Jan 2024, points 2.16, 2.20, 2.21, they state that in all current and future events, the flow of wastewater leaving site will be limited to the flow that could be expected to flow off the area as it is now, but we would challenge the validity and certainty of these statements. Additionally, in 2.17, this outlines the responsibility for drainage network in the future. We have concerns as to who will be responsible to replace, repair any unfunctional components for the Davidson's installed culvert pipework running under the bus garage in the adjacent land. We consider the water flow from the site after the exceptional rain will likely cause flooding problems downstream, where there is a pipe or pipes running across under Moor Lane at its junction with Stony Lane. Regarding sewage, we have serious reservations concerning the ability of the main sewers running through the village coping with the extra sewage volumes coming from 96 new houses. We suggest this extra flow will lead to an increase in the number of sewage flood events which Gorton currently suffers. Reviews by Severn Trent Water to date have seemingly been based on conflicting data. Anticipated loads on the sewage network have been estimated by Ardent Consulting Engineers at 5.37 litres. Severn Trent Water's own estimates have been stated at 1.8 litres. It is based on a smaller value that they have formed their earlier advice that the development is viable. We question how two professional bodies have arrived at differing estimates that are at variance by a factor of 3. We also note the recent introduction of a sewage pumping station might be a further complication. Pumping stations are usually designed to collect sewage to a sump before discharge is at a pressure once the sump approaches full capacity. Pumps are sized to limit the hours run and the numbers of starts per hour. It is to be expected, therefore, that the output volumes of the pump station will exceed the estimated inflow to the sump by a significant factor. What is the risk of the impact of a pressurised discharge on existing gravity systems that are downstream of the pumps? And how will the gravity systems and facilities connected downstream of the pumps be protected against backflow in the event of a blockage? In reference to affordable housing, in the recent document planning layout document, the total number of affordable homes is shown as 9. At the time of this application first appeared, dated 20th December 2019, the total number of affordable houses was shown as 29. This proposed reduction in affordable homes contradicts Rushcliffe Local Plan Part 2 Land and Planning Policies, Policy 9, Housing Allocation Land East of Gypsum Way, 3.113. In accordance with Policy 8 of the Core Strategy, 30% of new homes should be affordable homes, comprising intermediate affordable rent and social rent housing. We consider this a raw deal for Gotham, essentially depriving our residents of 19 affordable homes. In reference to overdevelopment, I refer again to Rushcliffe Local Plan Part 2 Land and Planning Policies, 3.107. Gotham has scope to sustain around 70 dwellings. The proposal is an increase on the 70 dwellings by 37%. This is significantly more than what was agreed in Local Plan Part 2 and makes a mockery of this policy. Neighbouring land, with reference to application...
30 seconds.
Thank you. I'll drop that out. Thank you. No, so I won't do that in 30 seconds.
Thank you. Well, 5 minutes can either seem, depending on your point of view, can either seem very quick or very short. And yeah, so I do understand. So our final speaker on this one is one of the ward members, Councillor Rex Walker. Rules are rules, Councillor Walker, as you know.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, colleagues. Let's focus on Policy 9 of our Local Plan Part 2. I'll raise some questions which I request you consider during your discussions and decision. Policy 9 identifies this land as an allocation for around 70 homes. This application, as you've heard, is for 96, net 92. Paragraph 69 of the report, which is around 70 for members seeking it out now, correctly states that part of the assessment here is determining if the proposed quantum of development is acceptable or not. I disagree that Local Plan Part 2 does not seek to place an upper limit on the number of dwellings. Look at paragraph 3.10 of the plan. I quote, Gotham has scope to sustain around 70 dwellings based on the existing size and status of the settlement, the capacity of local services and the size of the site. Whilst not specifying a maximum figure, it does clearly contextualise the quantum and the factors limiting sustainability. So, are you satisfied that this 37% increase in the quantum of development is compliant with the development plan? Any development is subject to a number of requirements. 9A, avoiding or mitigating impacts of the bus garage. The bus garage doesn't exist anymore. However, the land in question is now under the applicant's control and therefore likely to be subject to a future planning application. I'm more than happy to place on record my appreciation of the applicant's community engagement during the early stages of the application and for the improvement works undertaken to drainage infrastructure on and around the bus garage site, which have significantly improved flooding issues for Leek Road residents. It's simultaneously disappointing that these are now used as part justification for decreasing affordable housing provision on site, and further that we are not considering an application covering both sites. Now which would genuinely be doing planning the right way. Ought you to be considering impacts on the amenity of new residents resulting from the activities of the neighbouring development site. 9B protects the neighbouring wildlife site from adverse effects. Paragraph 85 and 86 of the report suggest that suitable measures can be achieved through post hoc legal agreements and conditions. Are you satisfied that the wildlife site will not be adversely affected? 9D deals with risk of surface water flooding, and I bring your particular attention to the word ensure when assessing the risk of flooding to new and existing residents. We know from the events referenced in the report and several more that have occurred since that during extreme rainfall, local draining systems fail. Failure here means surface and foul water in villagers' homes regularly, living with constant fear of waking up to several inches of sewerage in your kitchen rather than it being at the treatment plant. Please carefully consider paragraph 106A of the report. In it, Severn Trent Water admit they don't know what upgrades are required. Then look at paragraph 124, which bizarrely concludes that there is no technical objection, despite the monthly surcharges and flooding incidents along the network. When we know that we don't know what upgrades are required, how can we ensure new and existing residents are not at risk? 9E requires that residents are not significantly affected by the use of the highway access. I remain far from convinced that entry and egress arrangements to and from Leek Road are satisfactory. Due to the volume of on-street parking is effectively a single lane carriageway on a main bus route, frequently the site of accidents and collisions as recently as last month. Given the applicant now owns the bus garage site, it is mad to be creating an inadequate access, demolishing houses and seeking mitigation measures here, there and everywhere, when a perfectly good site access exists 100 metres down the road. In this context, are you content that residents' amenity will not be significantly affected by the highway access? 9F deals with compensating for the loss of existing parking, which of course would go away by using the bus garage access, but in any case is of course a major issue for the immediate occupiers. These proposals are a mess and have always been a mess, despite the applicant's considerable efforts to address them, which is acknowledged. How will the replacement spaces be allocated, agreed and managed? What do I do as a resident of, say, 86 Leek Road when someone parks in my space on land that I don't own?
30 seconds.
Please consider paragraphs 145 to 150 of the report carefully. 148 says we need a TRO to make it acceptable. 146 to 147 say a TRO application could be refused by the County Council, who would be perfectly within their rights to refuse one, even with planning permission. Are you not concerned that we are setting this up for failure?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Walker, and bang on 5 minutes, so thank you for that. So that's our final guest speaker for this item. We heard from Mr. Gore, who is the agent who gave us some background to the application and comments about the concerns that have been raised by various parties over the years. And we heard from Mr. Macaulay and Councillor Walker, who are objecting. Quite a lot of comments about drainage, sewerage, concerns and the issue of the affordable housing percentage and the overall increase in from 70 to 90. And again, we have more comments about the drainage issues and surface water. So can we pick up on all those points, both from the applicant and from the objectors, please?
Yes, of course, Chairman. Working through them in the order I've got them written down. Please forgive me if I've messed them. I've done my best. Happy to be pulled up on any items on there. So in terms of the drainage side of things, the report, I make no apologies for it. The report is lengthy. The report is detailed. The application has been scrutinised by the lead local flood authority on no fewer than 7 separate occasions. On none of those occasions have they objected. They are satisfied subject to the condition that is set out in the report. I don't think there's much more I can say in respect to the drainage side of things. We've heard that the applicants invested money in improving the existing system on site at their own risk. members can draw their conclusions as to why they may or may not have done that, but that's largely a consideration that should be taken into account in terms of improvements that have been made to the site compared to how it may have been left with a, how can I put this diplomatically, with a less considerate landowner. In terms of the flooding side of the foul drainage, again, there have been further documents that have sought to address the addendum that the parish council have raised. That document is available online. Again, there's quite a lot within the report about that. There's a lot of technical information within the comments made. Again, I would reiterate that Severn Trent Water are not objecting to the proposal, and there are separate processes that any landowner will have to go through prior to being allowed to connect into their infrastructure. So if members were minded to grant permission and Severn Trent object, that is a issue that the landowners will have to overcome before they can lawfully commence on site. So it shouldn't be a hindrance to members determining the application on that basis. With regards to the affordable housing, again, quite a lot in the report on the viability side of things. As Mr. Gore mentioned, this is an application that's been going on for many years now. The viability assessment alone was 18 months from submission to arrival of our conclusion. So again, not a process we have rushed in any way, shape or form. I fully accept that 9 houses is considerably less than the 30% provision that would be policy requirement on this site. However, policy 9 does allow through provision 5 for a reduction in that provision, provided it's been through the scrutiny and assessment, which our officers are satisfied it has been. With regards to overdevelopment, again, we look at the layout of the site, we assess it and its planning merits. We have to assess what's before us, Chairman, members of the committee. Yes, it is an increase. That is not uncommon on Part 2 sites across the borough. I'm sure there are other colleagues sat around the table who've had developments within their wards or within neighbouring wards where the number says around, and perhaps the number that's been approved either by officers or through the planning committee process has been higher than that number. We assess it on the planning merits. As I say, we've looked at the density, we've looked at the separation distances, we've looked at garden sizes, we've assessed it against the policies within the development plan. Officers are satisfied that that increase from 70 to 96 or net 92 is acceptable. With regards to any potential future applications on the neighbouring bus depot, I would remind members you have to determine the application before you tonight. We cannot speculate on what may or may not be submitted on a neighbouring land. I take the points that the ward members made, but those are the rules of the game. With regards to the highway access and the concerns about the safety issue, again, the Highway Authority are not objecting. They had raised a number of concerns with regards to the initial submissions. I think there were 4 or 5 rounds of consultation where Highway Authority did raise concerns. The applicant has worked with the Highway Authority to address those concerns and ultimately arrived at a position where the Highway Authority are satisfied, subject to conditions set out within the recommendation. With regards to the TRO process, the Traffic Regulation Order, or double yellow lines, as you and I may know them, again, as the report sets out, that is a separate process to the planning system. The Highway Authority could object, much as Severn Trent could object to connections. That's not a reason not to determine the planning application. If the Highway Authority were to object, that's a further issue that the applicant would have to address before they could lawfully implement any consent members may wish to grant this evening. I think that was all of them, Chair.
Yes, I think it was. Obviously, members will raise questions in a moment. So we'll come to that point now. Ready to any questions, comments, and Councillor Edwin first, please.
Can I just clarify? We are allowed to ask points of clarification to the speakers. No.
As long as yes, they need to be very brief, though. It's very much at the chairman's discretion, and
Okay.
yeah.
I'd just like to address the point that, and I agree, obviously we've got to address what's in front of us today, but would the developer like to comment on why the bus depot hasn't come through as a whole?
I think we might be getting into awkward territory there. I think,
okay.
Because the golden rule is as Mr. Taylor has said, and we have said it often at other committee meetings, that you can speculate about what might or might not happen elsewhere, but we have an application before us with the information. So I would suggest we can't get into that realm.
No, okay, fine. There was one other point, which I will, no, which is to the officers. We're talking about sewage capacity, all that sort of thing. I think in my understanding in the past, because I've been told it before, is that basically it's not a planning matter because Severn Trent have a legal responsibility to ensure that the system is adequate. I just felt that the way that you were making some of those remarks suggested that if they object because the system, and then, you know, you made the point that at some stage they will ask to join up to the sewage system and Severn Trent may object. But I think I'd always understood in the past that they can't because they've got a legal responsibility to ensure that the sewage system is adequate, which we all know that they don't.
Perfectly reasonable question and for clarification, and we'll get an answer on that so that we all understand what the role of Severn Trent and at what point it might affect the applicants being able to do what they, even if they've got planning.
Yeah. So thank you, Chair. Colleagues kindly just passed me clarification on point. So sewage undertakers have a general duty to provide public sewers and clean and maintain them so as effectively to drain their areas. They also have a general duty to provide and extend sewage systems to ensure that the area is and continues to be effectually drained, and that's a requirement of the Water Industry Act 1991, section 94. The drainage hierarchy applies, and where the location is served by a public sewer, the default should always be that we would expect any new development to connect to it. Legislation covering connection to public sewers is contained within section 106 and section 109 of the Water Industry Act 1991. Section 106 of the Act provides that an owner or occupier of any premises may have his or her drains or private sewer communicate with the public sewers of the sewerage undertaker. Upon receiving a completed application, the water company has 21 days to issue consent. They can only refuse a connection where the mode of construction or condition of the drain or private sewer to be connected to the public sewer is such that it does not satisfy the standards reasonably required, or if undertaking the works will prejudice the public sewer system. There is no provision within the Act of the Water Company to reject a connection due to capacity issues. They are expected to plan for growth and increase capacity in their systems as needed.
Thank you. That's very comprehensive. Councillor Reddyvin, is that helpful? Do you want to come back?
It just underlines my point in a way that, you know, and I absolutely understand what you're saying. But we know from many experiences that the water companies don't fulfil their duty.
Okay, thank you. That was an observation. Councillor Mallender, please.
I thought there were people before me. Apologies, Chair. You might need to. I said I thought there were people before me, so I wasn't. No. Oh, thank you. Of course. No. Thank you, Chair. I am very concerned that yet again we are reducing here the number of affordable houses on the site, of dwellings on the site, from, I believe it was 29 originally, according to the parish council speaker, to 9. One of the things that was said was that these might be either intermediate, affordable rent, or social rent. So I was wondering if I could ask a question, which is, one, what mix of affordability is there? Are they all one of those three things, or is there a mixture? Although you're somewhat restricted with only 9 dwellings. And also the design of the affordable houses, which we saw briefly. I'd just like to ask, was that a flat or apartments, or was it you know, how many bedrooms do they have? That if it's a full planning permission, so surely that is known. I'm asking lots of questions, so that's the first pair. I'd just like to ask also what effort has been made by the developer to have environmental measures on the housing now that, for instance, are they using air or ground heat source pumps? Are they solar ready? Will there be solar panels on the roof? What other environmental measures in terms of other than building regs insulation are there? Are they better than that? We've been told what a good developer they are, so I'm hoping to hear that there are some really good things coming from that. I'm concerned about the paragraph from the Wildlife Trust because they say that the hedgerow that is going to be either retained or planted, I do hope it's retained. There's a big difference between something that's been there for many years and a newly planted hedge. They're saying that it's actually part of people's gardens and there's some sort of vague idea of being a covenant. Now, I'm always being told by members of the public, oh, it's all right, they can't build on this land because, or do whatever it is, because there's a covenant on it. And mostly, I'm sad to say, it's rubbish. That it just doesn't seem to have any teeth at all, a covenant. So is there some other way that we can ensure that the hedgerows are retained other than putting them in the bottom of people's gardens, whereas the Wildlife Trust say that the likelihood is that people might either completely remove them or not look after them very well. And there's also, it says about looking after trees. Looking at the site, both on Google Maps and the aerial photograph provided, there only appears to be one tree that has a TPO, and that seems to be, according to the report, the only one that's protected. But looking, I can see a lot of smaller trees on the site, which I would say, and I do work in this field, that look like very good habitat. So is that all going, or is there some retention of it? And if so, can we see the plans? I may have missed it, but on the map I couldn't see where the playground was and the other green space. What was the last thing? Oh yes, the ward councillor mentioned about parking places that have been provided to help them because they've lost their roadside parking. How will that those parking places provided on site be protected or retained for those existing residents when they don't actually own the land, which is what the ward member mentioned? And I am worried generally about things like the natural landscape, which obviously absorbs a great deal more surface water than any building, and certainly doesn't produce a lot of sewage like buildings do. How will all this be enforced, that the everything's cared for? Because some of the reports seems to indicate that it seems that the responsibility is being passed on to other people when the surface water flows elsewhere. So I'd just like to make sure that a very good job is made of enforcement of all these things and all the conditions that are there. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Manners. There are lots of points there. Mr. Taylor will come back. I think there's a little bit of help perhaps with regards to the affordability question, around about paragraph 203, explains the type of affordable housing. Have a little read of that. But and then the other points basically are hedges, trees, the parking for the Leak Road. How's that going to be managed? And then sewerage again. So it's,
Thank you. Through you, Chairman. Yeah, you quite rightly identified the correct paragraph in the report. I can also clarify, I've got a sort of housing type breakdown for both the open market and the affordable housing, so I can clarify for Councillor Mallender. There are proposed to be 2 one-bedroomed maisonettes, 3 two-bedroomed semi-detached properties, 2 two-bedroomed terrace properties, 1 3-bedroom semi-detached, and another. Sorry, no, there should be 2 3-bedroom semi-detached. They've just listed them on the line. So that's a total of 9 properties. So a mixture of 1 bed and 2 properties, with 2 of them being maisonettes. So a variety. With regards to the eco credentials of the buildings themselves, I'd remind members that viability has become an issue on this site. Obviously, I'm sure the developer might like in an ideal world to do more than the building regs require. The plans don't detail things like air source heat pumps that Councillor Mallender has raised, but there are conditions within the proposal for eco credentials in terms of habitats for species and things like that. So swift boxes, bat boxes, things like that. Condition 7. Thank you, Chairman. With regards to trees and the protected TPO trees on the site, the Borough Council's Senior Design and Landscaping Officer has visited and assessed the application. Obviously, the beech tree that I showed members when we did the virtual site visit is the protected, the tree preservation order tree on the site. You're right, there are a number of other trees on the site, but my colleague's advice is they are not fulfilling the criteria to be worthy of protection in their own right. I'm just the mouthpiece for the information.
Could I? Yeah, but what you mean is a tree preservation order. Tree preservation orders have got nothing to do with the ecological value of anything. They're to do with visual amenity and whether or not people can see it from the highway. It's so I'm not impressed by that.
There are a number. I think one of the questions you did ask, Councillor Mallender, was whether there was sort of a plan to show the trees to be retained. I can get that up on the screen. Colleagues kindly assisted me with that. So there is a plan showing the trees to be protected. It's the technical plan. I think it's the first plan at the end of the presentation. That one there. And open green spaces. You scroll up, that one there. So I'm not sure how clear this is on the screen. Apologies, members, but no, it is that plan. There's no way of zooming in, unfortunately. But the trees that run along the rears of the properties on Leek Road to be retained. Trees on the northern boundary of the site to be retained. And I appreciate it might not be the clearest thing on the there's one on the southern boundary, a couple on the southern boundary as well. And there is some additional planting shown on that plan as well. The playground that Councillor Mallender inquired about is within the green space on the southern boundary of the site, and there's another pocket of green space at the sort of the head of the spine road running into the site there as well as sort of green spaces around the balancing feature, but I appreciate they are much smaller areas. With regards to the displaced parking to the rears of the properties as highlighted, it's my understanding from the developer that they are to be transferred to the owners of those properties, so they will become theirs. They will be their legal responsibility, so they will be able to invoke trespass rights and things like that should others choose to park in them. But that would be a civil matter between them and potentially any offenders. With regards to surface water management, there are conditions within the report that require details to be submitted for the management and maintenance of the on-site water management on the site. Anything that connects into that system but is outside of the red line boundary would be the responsibility of any neighbouring landowner or owners. The developer can't be obligated to sort out drainage problems that may exist up or downstream, if you'll forgive the pun.
Thank you. Councillor Calvert, I've now seen your hand go up, so sorry I missed you earlier.
Thank you, Chairman. As a borough, a county, region and nation, we desperately need more housing, in particular affordable housing. I want to start with the positives of this application, and that is the site is allocated in the adopted local plan, albeit for 70 dwellings rather than the 90 plus that we've heard. The location of the site is very sustainable for a rural village. It's close to the village centre, and it's particularly well served by a frequent bus service that runs between Loughborough and Nottingham. It's a particularly good location for those to live in who would be dependent on public transport, possibly people who may seek affordable housing. I've got three issues of concern that I want to raise, and the first one is the viability assessment. The planning department very kindly produced a briefing note on viability assessments, and the trouble with getting extra information is that it just raises more questions. It was very helpful, but it certainly whet my appetite to look into this subject. My particular concern with the viability assessment is the proposal, which we've heard quite a lot already this evening, about the quota of affordable social housing being reduced substantially from 30% to less than 10%, or 28 or 29 dwellings down to 9 dwellings, of which the majority seem to be affordable routes to home ownership and not necessarily social rented accommodation. I understand from the planners that Rushcliffe Borough Council is not unique in having to negotiate with developers who have a canny knack to plead the unviability of their proposed developments, and the outcome is invariably a reduction in the affordable housing quotas. I did ask the planners for an estimate of the total loss of affordable housing that has arisen as a result of viability assessments since the local plan was adopted in 2019. But I only raised this a couple of days before tonight's meeting, and so understandably there was not enough time to research the matter. However, I conclude that there is a pressing need to examine how the council is implementing the policies around negotiation of affordability. An example is, I haven't looked at LPP Part 2, but I've looked at the core strategy, which is LPP Part 1. And in this occasion, it's Policy 8 rather than Policy 9. And without getting too technical about this, it talks about the proportion of affordable housing that should be sought through negotiation on strategic sites and within each housing submarket. And it quotes what the figure is. And for strategic sites, it says up to 30%. For the rural Rushcliffe area, of which Gotham is part of, it says 30%. So the way I read that is that there's more scope for negotiation for strategic sites, but we should be more specific and follow the 30% more religiously with the category of this particular submarket area, which includes West Bridgford as well. So that's my first concern. The second concern is to do with the section 106 and what's called the Community Infrastructure Levy. And here I need to go to the appendix, and it's the right back page of this thing, section 106, draft heads of term summary. And this quotes a figure of a community infrastructure levy receipt of 463,500 pounds. Of this, 371,000 would go towards items on the Borough Council's strategic infrastructure list, and up to almost 70,000 towards the Gotham neighbourhood SIL. And my query with this is how much of the remainder of this 371,000 is likely to benefit the community of Gotham in a social, economic or environmental way. The third concern is much less technical, you'll be pleased to know. It's more of an observation, but it's to question the effectiveness of the consultation with Gotham Parish Council, with the local people, and also to the attention that's afforded to the policies in the Gotham Neighbourhood Plan. And from reading what's going on, I find it disappointing that there is still considerable opposition to the planning application. And so I would question whether it's been a case of high quantity of consultation, but a question mark about its quality. Final comment, and this is just an aside really, which is about further information about the bus depot. I went to look at the site, and when you get to the bus depot, there's a bus stop right beyond it, and on it is a storyboard that celebrates the 95 years of the company, and it's running from 1926 to 2021, and at the very end it says 2021 closed down and it's been sold off for housing. So there's just some additional information about what's happening there. Thank you.
A lot of points there. With regards to that, it may all say what it says on a sign. There may or may not be an application in the future, and if there is, that will be dealt with on its individual pluses or minuses, I'm sure, but it will be. So we've got a lot of points to cover there, because this viability situation is quite new to us, and so it's understandable there are questions about that, and but we're also picking up on the neighbourhood plan and the consultation. There is quite a lot of reference to consultation with parish and residents. But anyway, sorry, I'm stepping into your time. Sorry.
Not at all, Chairman. Always appreciate the clarification. With regards to the viability assessment, thank you for asking the questions in advance, and apologies I couldn't answer all of them. No, appreciate that. You're right. The loss of affordable housing is not something that any of us in this room would like to see. I'm sure that's fair to say, speaking on behalf of everyone in the room. The realities are we are faced with an increase in the number of houses on the site from the around 70 to the proposal of 96. And even at that uplift, that increase in the number of houses, there's still not enough money in the pot to pay for everything. So unfortunately, something has to give, and it's either a case of the developer walks away from the site and we get absolutely nothing, we get no open market housing, we get no reduced affordable housing provision, and the site remains undeveloped. People may have their own view on that, or the developer has to go through a very lengthy technical process to say, well, this is what could fall off the wayside, this is what potentially might be more palatable. And it's a case of it's almost like a shopping list, councillor. It's a case of there's a requirement to provide education contributions, there's a requirement to provide healthcare contributions, there's a requirement to provide open space, there's a requirement for affordable housing. It's not for me to sit here and say what's more important than others. Members can form their own view on that, but it is more often than not affordable housing that is one of the first things to come off that shopping list, if I can put it in those terms. There is a reduction. You're right, it is a reduction from the 30% down to the 9%, and you've quite rightly identified the correct policy within the plan, and you've quite rightly identified the correct area that the policy relates to in terms of the 30% provision. There is a little bit beyond that table. So there's section 5 of that policy that says the overall proportion and mix of affordable housing will be determined by, and then there's a list of 4 bullet points. And bullet point C says the ability to deliver affordable housing alongside other requirements, taking into account broad assessments of viability. Where the findings of local assessments are disputed on a particular site, a financial appraisal of the proposal will be expected in order to determine an appropriate level of affordable housing. So the policy does acknowledge that in certain scenarios, yes, 30% is the policy requirement. But if there are circumstances on a particular site, the council can explore a reduction in that, provided we go through the appropriate viability appraisal, we have that independently scrutinised, and our independent assessor agrees with that finding made by the developer. That is what's happened in this scenario. So it may sound like semantics. It's not policy compliant, but it does comply with the policy in terms of the permitted elements within that policy. Regarding your question about CIL, Community Infrastructure Levy, I think the question was what proportion goes to GOTM. My understanding, and I'm sure my colleagues will correct me if I'm wrong, is that CIL is a pot of money into which the money goes and upon which bids can be made. Section 106 goes to specific things identified within the document. SIL, if you think of it very simply, as a box of money. Different parishes can make a bid on that money for appropriate factors. Anyway.
Sorry, don't mean to interrupt. So there is a parish proportion of SIL. So there is a proportion of the SIL contribution that goes direct to the parish, and we release that twice a year. So we've actually released some of the spring funding today. So Gotham as a parish would get a proportion of SIL for them to spend on projects that they identified without having to bid directly to the borough. And then there is the larger infrastructure list, which my colleague was speaking about, which is things like secondary schools and those big projects where we need to pull money from lots of different developments. So there's a portion that goes to Gotham directly, and then Gotham gets a share of the bigger pot when we need a new secondary school, for example.
Yes, you want to come back, Councillor Cabot?
Yeah, it was just my reading of that list that exists at the moment, and I believe it is assessed and reviewed annually. There didn't seem to be a lot in there that was going to appeal to the villages. All this money is coming in because of a development in Gotham, but all it's getting is this 70,000 as opposed, doesn't really get a look in at the 371. May be able to bid, but in terms of successful bids,
Could it be that the provision is facilities and provision that is provided by SIL, not necessarily directly in Gotham, will still benefit the Gotham residents? Is that sorry, did you want to come in on that?
Also, to clarify, that's the element from SIL. There will also be a section 106 will be specifically for monies towards the community to mitigate the identified harms from the proposal. Your fourth question, or final question, was, I believe, in relation to the effectiveness of communication and attention to the neighbourhood plan. Neighbourhood plans can't prevent an allocated development from taking place. That's not their function. It's if you think of it in simplistic terms, it's a tool to direct development to a location that the parish may find more acceptable. But if a site's been allocated, as it has in this instance within local plan part 2, no neighbourhood plan can remove that allocation from the process. I take your point. Yes, there has been a lot of communication within the report. Again, I've looked at the relevant policies within the neighbourhood plan. My assessment of that is that the application does comply with the requirements of the neighbourhood plan, and it has been considered. Thank you, Chair.
Yep. Okay.
One very last comment, and that's the big issue that I raised, which is about the viability. And you did say about it often becomes affordable housing often becomes the first one to come off the list. Well, I would have thought that's something that is dependent on negotiation, and I would recommend strongly that we try to keep this high up on the list and not one of the first to fall off.
If it helps members, I've looked at all the sites within part 2, all the allocation sites, and we've got one site within Rushcliffe-on-Trent. Policy allocation was for around 50 homes. What was ultimately approved was 55, but that site is 100% affordable. So where we may be losing on some sites, arguably we're winning on others. So on that site, 55, the market area that it falls in, there would have been a requirement for 17 homes on that site. We've ended up with 55. So there's been an uplift there. Similarly, on some of the strategic sites, Fareham, which sits not too far north of this particular settlement, viability did become an issue on that. The 30% requirement was accepted and reduced to 10%. But on one of I've had 2 approved phases on that development so far. One's come in at 10%, the others come in at 33%. So again, we are seeing uplifts where economically viable, depending on market conditions on other sites across the borough.
Thank you. Good discussion. Councillor Ellis, and then Councillor Chaplin, and then Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I think we shouldn't be getting hung up on viability issues. It's absolutely clear that a site must be viable, however you calculate that, for it to go ahead. So the choice is often, as I think you said, we negotiate as best we can and reach a conclusion which allows the development to go ahead. or we stick to our guns, and 30% is quite obviously unrealistic in this particular instance, and the developer walks away. Well, who benefits from that? I think we've got to rely on officers and the professionals with whom I think we have to rely on officers and the professionals with whom they deal to arrive at a realistic figure. And I believe that's probably been done in this case. But as I have no involvement and as I have no knowledge of the economics of the development, I can't make an informed judgment. But by the same token, nor can any of the other members. So I suggest we just accept that what we've got on the table is the proposal, and we vote on it as it stands when it comes to the vote. Now, I do sympathise very much with the concerns about flooding, sewerage waste, probable lack of enough car parking. They are real issues, and as we know from reading the newspapers on a daily basis, the water companies haven't covered themselves in glory. I don't think Severn Trent is one of the worst, but it is right to be a little bit sceptical about some of their calculations, I think, especially when, as has been pointed out, there is such a big discrepancy between the calculations of two professional outfits. So I think we do need to take that into account. But I think at the end of the day, it boils down to, do the things that we don't know for certain, are they sufficient for us to reject the application when there are so many obvious benefits in approving it? I'm still dwelling on that, Chair, but I think it's worth consideration.
Okay, thank you. We'll hold that thought, because I've got two other speakers. I've got Councillor Chaplin there, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, looking at this brought to mind the design code workshop that I took part in a couple of weeks ago, where we were talking about new developments that didn't add anything to Rushcliffe. And this just looks like what we were talking about, that it could be an estate anywhere in the country that's just been plonked down in Gotham. But anyway, that just means we need to get on and get this design code written so that we can start making enforcements. But one of my concerns is obviously the affordable houses, not just that there's only 9, but of those 9, I think I found that 6 of them are going to be discounted first homes, which seems quite a big proportion, as the government guidance is that 25% of affordable housing should be discounted first homes. So we've got 6 discounted first homes, 2 affordable rent, and just 1 social rent. So even in that breakdown of the 9 affordable rent, doesn't seem to be fulfilling the needs of the community necessarily. The type of housing as well, if you look in the Gotham neighbourhood plan, and I know when they talk about what sort of housing they want, it is in reference to the areas they've identified, not strategic areas. But there was a big call for 1-bedroom flats for young people starting off or older people downsizing. In these 96 houses, we've got 2 1-bedroom maisonettes as part of the affordable housing, no 1-bedroomed buildings in open market. Of the 96, 31 are 4- and 5-bedroomed houses. And this is the thing we get when we talk to people about what's wrong with the new houses in Rushcliffe, is people say they're building estates with all these big 4- or 5-bedroom houses that nobody can afford. What we need are affordable houses. even when they're not talking about affordable houses. So I'm very concerned about the makeup, not only of officially affordable ones, but also the houses that make up this estate. One other thing I did notice in the local plan part 2, policy 9, it does mention that the buffer between the houses and the bus depot should be woodland. And according to this, it's a hedge. Can you just clarify that for me, please? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we know the answer to that? The buffer? Yeah, you do. You're giving me that look as if you know the answer. So if we could pick up on all those points, please. I suspect you might make the point again about the borough-wide allocation of affordable properties. Over to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. I will provide the answer that I can.
Yes.
Is how I would answer your question. Pleased to hear Councillor Chapman mention the design code workshop. I've attended similar, and I think my understanding is you start with the land you own or the land you're potentially going to own, and you look at the constraints on there in terms of, are there ecological features, are there drainage features, and then you design the scheme around that. I think it's fair to say that the house types proposed as part of this applicant from this application have got higher elements of design in them, perhaps some of their competitors out there. I don't think we've been fortunate enough to have any of their developments built within the borough yet, but I know of others elsewhere within the county. And I think it's fair to say the quality, the difference is potentially noticeable to some of their competitors, but I also appreciate design is a subjective matter. So I'll say no more. So in terms of the affordable housing and the provision of first homes, you are quite right. The national guidance is no more than 25%. I think paragraph 203 of my report does set out the breakdown, and it is only 2 homes on this site, so it is compliant with that standard. I appreciate there was a lot of documentation and a lot of paragraphs to read, so I can understand how that one may have slipped through the net, as it were. With regards to policy 9 and the bus depot and the hedge, the policy was drafted and adopted through the examination in public at the time when the bus depot was still operational. As Councillor Calvert has informed us, and as we've seen from the photographs, that has now ceased trading. We have to assess the application that's before us. That there is mitigation proposed in terms of potential noise disturbance from the application site to that particular neighbouring land use, because I'm mindful that whilst the applicant may own it and we can speculate on what they may wish to do with it, there are a number of things they could potentially do with it. They could start running a bus company. They could start running a bus company tomorrow and they wouldn't require any permission for that. So having assessed that relationship, we've looked at what's the potential harm, how do we potentially mitigate that? So speaking with colleagues in environmental health, they were more concerned that should a bus company or a similar operation start trading from there, which would require no planning consent, there's a potential for noise disturbance between the application before you tonight and that potential activity. And their advice was that a acoustic fence would be a more appropriate solution on that boundary.
So, yeah, we've been led to believe that anything that is in the local plan has to be stuck to, that it's there, so we have to do it. This has obviously shown that actually you can alter it if things change, which is interesting. Thank you.
What I would say, Councillor Chapman, is planning is always a balance. We have to make an assessment on what's in front of us. I think the wording is within the justification to the policy. It's not a policy requirement itself. It is sort of referred within the neighbourhood plan documentation. But I take the point. But I still stand by that. We have to assess what's before us. We have to assess those relationships. Planning is rarely black and white. I think members of the committee are probably discovering.
Which is one of the reasons why, of course, applications come to committee, and just in situations like this, ultimately we have to make a decision. And I'm conscious of the fact that we are giving a lot of discussion to this, and there's a danger of going over points that we may already have mentioned. So just bear that in mind. Councillor Thomas, I think you were next to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've got 10 things to cover, and I was rather hoping that some of them would have gone, but I need to come back on some of them if that's okay. It won't take a long time. I'd like to echo what Councillor Calvert said about the positives, really, that this is an allocated site. And also I'd say that my experience of Davidson's, it probably bears out what was said by the agent, actually, in terms of the care and attention that they've given to consultation and so on. And also design, I would say, you know, I would support that, really. That I've got some issues, really. And some of them have been touched on. As far as the flooding, the sewage is concerned, there is an advisory note that said the applicant should consult Severn Trent Water, who should be satisfied that the sewerage and sewage disposal systems serving the development have sufficient capacity to accommodate additional flows generated as a result of the development without causing pollution. Would it be possible for that to be strengthened into a condition so that the application doesn't proceed until there is evidence that they have actually consulted Severn Trent Water? I know Severn Trent Water don't have to necessarily, that they have to connect everybody, but I think it would be better to have that assurance as a condition, if that's at all possible. So that was the first thing, really. The second thing is the issue of affordable housing, and there are no affordable rent, social rent houses, as far as I was aware. And I think it would be a lot easier to suck up the viability issue and the reduction of the number of houses, as Councillor Chapman said, if the social rent aspect, and these are the people who really need houses in a sustainable location, if those were being made available. Are officers working in that field content with the mix of different tenure types in there? Solar panels, that was raised, and again you've replied that that's an issue of viability, but we've had at least one housing estate where they've gone back and retrofitted environmental panels, solar panels, in order to meet environmental regulations. And I was just wondering if we're absolutely convinced that this, given the length of time that this development has been in process, that they do satisfy the environmental regulations. I've got a question about plots 59 and 60 and the layout and the parking of them. Have these plots got outdoor space? I'm a bit concerned about the layout of the drive and so on. Also, that housing type, that house type appears to have, in the plans, it's shown as a block of 4. And on this plan, there are 2, it's shown as 2 houses in that configuration. So I was a bit confused about which housing type plan refers to plots 59 and 60. Also, the fact that they don't appear to have outside space. And when it comes to the parking spaces that have been provided, I realise there's a lot of work gone into providing these parking spaces for the people on Leek Road, but I don't see why they're not provided as being contiguous to the land at the back of them, which they could be, from what I could gather. They're offset, and it could be a much better solution if they were lined up with the houses. The connection, is there any connection to the footpath, the trail that runs along the old railway line? There's something in there about preserving the opportunity to connect to that footpath. Well, we all know what that means, really, that it won't happen. That's our experience elsewhere. And
I think that's a little bit of an unfair assumption.
Unfair. But maybe you could just explain how that is going to happen.
Let's just stick to what the information we've got. The very detailed report and considerable information we've had this evening, and not going into realms of speculating again. It's very
Okay, so the question is, what will be done to connect that up to the trail at the back, and will it connect to Gypsum Way to provide access to the footpaths the other side of the road, without people having to go all the way around? And similarly, what will be the route that the children will take to walk to the primary school? Will they have to go all the way around the main road, or will there be a connector? The section 106 on primary school children says that they'll be going to Eastleek to primary school, which I found astonishing, really. These children are going to be closer to the Goton Primary School than the Fareham children, and they would get preference for places on these once they're in the steady state of first admissions. Surely these children would be going to the Goton School. So I don't really understand why the section 106 is saying that they'll be going to Eastleek and requesting contributions, presumably, to increase the schooling in Eastleek, which, as I understand it, is not currently full. So I don't understand that. And if I was Davidson's, I wouldn't be paying that. So the area of woodland to the left-hand side of the picture, is that available to the public, or is it fenced off as a biodiversity net gain? And the last question I had was, are there hedgehog holes to provide connectivity for hedgehogs? I see there are electric vehicle charging points as a condition about that. Thank you.
wow. There's a lot of questions there, and it's fine to ask them. It's possible we may not necessarily have all the answers, and coupled with some of the other questions that you and colleagues have asked this evening. So we'll try and pick up on some of your points there, but I'm starting to wonder whether there are still quite a lot of questions that we may not have the answers to necessarily give a firm decision. That's I'm just putting that thought in my mind and colleagues' minds as well, because there plainly are still quite a few questions. So anyway, sorry, just so can we pick up on what we can on those before we go on?
Thank you, Chairman, through you. The query about the informative note with regards to Severn Trent Water, that was a request from Severn Trent Water themselves. My view is it's covered by separate legislation, therefore we shouldn't be doubling up in terms of conditioning things that are covered by other matters. With regards to the affordable housing, apologies, I've missed the word affordable rent off the end of paragraph 203. So the mix has been shared with colleagues in the affordable housing team. They are content with the mix. With regards to the query regarding solar panels, my understanding is the building regulations now requires, in certain scenarios, solar panels to be a potential option on some of the properties. If that were to apply to this scheme, the developer would have to explore that through the appropriate planning mechanism. With regards to plots 59 and 60, just looking at the plan, I think you are correct. There is no private amenity space for them. They are maisonettes. They are flats one above one another. That is what's proposed. That is what's before members for consideration this evening. However, there is open space provision on site and access to it within relatively easy walking distance of the site. And that is one of the exceptions for under provision within the current residential design guide. With regards to the connection to the footpath, you're correct in the wording. It has to not prevent that as a potential option. My understanding is that that walkway through that woodland is privately owned. Therefore, the developer is proposing to provide a connection up to it, but until such time the owner of the footpath themselves is open to negotiation or changes their mind, the developer has no legal right to connect into it, but nevertheless they can provide a connection to it. With regards to the section 106 query regarding the primary school, the initial understanding from colleagues at the county council was that the children from this school would go to Fareham. The school there has been delayed for a number of technical reasons, and relatively recently they've come back with a request for contribution towards schooling within Eastleek. That's the request that's come from colleagues at County Education and has been shared with the applicants. With regards to the woodland, yes, that area is fenced off. It's an area of ecological protection and an area of biodiversity net gain. And with regards to the query regarding hedgehog holes, covered by condition 7, which seeks to secure a number of ecological mitigation measures, including bird boxes, bat boxes, swift bricks, bee bricks, and hedgehog holes. Thank you, Chair.
So there we are, detailed answers. Hope that's helpful. Right, is anyone else wishing to speak? Or Councillor Wells?
Thank you, Chair. I have been out to this site on Sunday, and I spoke to a couple of the residents who are washing their car, and they said they take their lives in their own hands, and they are going to get land at the back of their house, which will be gifted to them as a present, and they're very happy about that. But as I've sat here and listened to everybody, it's obvious to me that this plan isn't really ready. So I asked the officers, can we defer it so they can discuss with the developers on all the points put forward? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wells. Yes, we can ask that question, and I must admit, given some of the uncertainties, I get the impression that members are still not completely sure of some of the answers we've heard, especially in this new arena that we have of the viability, and also regarding the affordable housing quotas and mix, both on this site, but the impact around the borough. So that thought was going through my mind, which is something I normally don't like, sort of not making a decision. But given the amount of comment that we've had this evening, but what can you advise us technically and on that, please?
Of course, Chair. It is an option open to members. You can make one of a number of proposals. Obviously, it is something that would need to be voted on, but yes, deferral is an option. You're right, it's not something Rushcliffe have done within my time at the authority, but nevertheless, yes, it is an option open to members this evening.
Yeah, it's Councillor Ellis.
I just wonder if we defer it, when we come back, will we just be in pretty much the same position?
Ms. Visitor.
I think what officers would need to know, if you would like to make a motion to defer it, is the specific areas you would like more information on, and we can go away and look at those areas again. So we need to be quite specific about the reasons why we're doing a deferral, and then hopefully that would narrow the discussion in the next committee it comes back to.
The big concern, the really big concern, is the flooding and the sewer problem. Will officers manage to assuage any doubts about those two aspects if we defer it? Or as I said before, are we going to come back to essentially the same situation as we're in at the moment?
This is a position we've not been in before, so we're just taking a bit of advice how we deal with that. But I think your point you make is right. I mean, if we came back to, if we had to defer and then we came back, we'd have to be very careful not to go over all known ground, but just concentrate on the queries we have. I think is that right?
Yes, sorry, Chairman. As you say, we don't do this very often, so we were just having a little conflab about what would be reasonable. I think on technical issues such as flooding, it's knowing what additional information or assurance the committee would want. We have been to the LLFA several times. We can certainly speak with them again, but if members are able to narrow down a bit more exactly what they want us to try and to find out, that would be really helpful. I think Chairman mentioned around the affordable housing and viability as well. So again, if we can have a bit more specific what information you would like, and that would help us.
Yeah, do you want to come back?
Yes, please, Chair. Of the two water-related problems, the flooding and the sewage, speaking personally, the sewage would be of more concern to me than the flooding itself, although both are undesirable. But it's one thing to have maybe slightly dirty water coming into your house, and a totally different one to have sewage coming into your house. So if I recall correctly, and obviously correct me if I'm wrong, Severn Trent did a calculation and another body for the developers or for someone else did a calculation. There were two calculations, and one was roughly 3 times more than the other. If we could resolve, not necessarily which is pedantically accurate, but which way it's going. Is it nearer to the Severn Trent calculation or nearer to the other calculation? If it's nearer to the Severn Trent calculation, then I think that's as good as we're going to get. If it goes the other way, then I think we seriously need to reconsider.
Thank you, Chair. I think the difficulty we've got with sewage is it's part of planning, but there's another act which Paul referred to earlier that kind of comes under, and we don't condition sewage because of that. There's other legislation that deals with that. So whilst we could get more information, and we're happy to do so, it's limited in terms of what we could control through the planning process, because as we said earlier, there is an expectation and a requirement from Severn Trent Water in this instance to provide a connection to the sewer. The capacity issue is their problem to deal with. But whilst I fully appreciate it, it becomes our problem. It's difficult to navigate that through the planning system. But if there's further information and further clarification on how that will kind of flow out into the future, then that's something that we can provide. But managing that in planning can be difficult.
Thank you. Good question. Councillor Thomas and then Councillor Calvert.
I think I read somewhere in there that they were putting in the pumping station to give them more options as to how to route the sewage, because it would be at a different level. And I was wondering if we could have more information on the options as to how the sewage goes into the sewerage system, the main sewerage system. That is something that would have to be done anyway, if to satisfy the application, as I understand it. And I think that might help some of the issues. The other thing on the flooding is the raising of the level of this site. I think the concern would be that would cause flooding problems elsewhere, because the houses along the main road are not raised, and I think some sort of note as to how that is being dealt with would help. Although I expect there is calculations as to how much is going in the suds and reducing the runoff, but members might feel more, and the parish council might feel more content with that if there was more information that addressed those points specifically.
You're quite right, Councillor Thomas, that there are technical calculations. They are very technical. They refer to something called Q-bar, is the new language that you need to learn in the world of drainage, and that's the greenfield runoff rate. So you're correct. Levels are being proposed to be raised across this site. The developer has a responsibility to mitigate any potential flooding from their site, and as I've sort of outlined on the scheme today, there's the attenuation basin, there's the existing drainage swales through the site, there's also proposed additional drainage. So the hierarchy is that you sort of contain it on the site to the point where the heavens are opening, and you in effect hold that and you slow that release into the wider environment so that it provides a betterment compared to if there was nothing on that site now and it was just left for the heavens to open and the water to flow. So that's the very basic premise. It's a very technical science and a very technical art. The developers have provided that information. That information has been scrutinised by colleagues with the technical expertise to do so. Additional information has also been provided in the forms of addendums and updates to those addendums by the applicants. At no point have those calculations been disputed by the technical body. So I understand the point. There is a lot of information there. I would go as far as to say my initial draft of the report was probably 50% longer than what you've got in front of you today. And it's that delicate balance between giving you War and Peace chapter and verse on it, giving something that's digestible and understandable, and striking that balance. So yes, I can provide you with further additional information. It will probably start training into the realms of being quite technical. I'm happy to do that if that will assist members.
And which is an option, but also minded of paragraph 94 in particular. It does state very clearly the Environment Agency, the lead flood authority, numerous discussions, numerous meetings over long periods of times are going to and fro, and they're not objecting. So that could be part of the answer we might get after asking more questions. I mean, because it's making it very clear, no less than seven separate occasions. Councillor Rediving.
Whilst I sort of accept that deferment might be an okay thing, I'm struggling to see what we're going to ask that isn't there. So we either believe the officer's report or we don't. And I'm going to make myself slightly unpopular by proposing that we accept the officer's report, and there aren't any additional conditions as we've heard that we can put on. There's nothing I've heard listening to the arguments tonight that would give us anything that was reasonable grounds to reject this application. And you all know that I'm always looking for those if I don't like an application, but I just can't see anything here that allows us to reasonably reject this application. So therefore I'd like to move that we at least put it to the vote as to whether to accept it or not.
And I was just going to, well, you've indicated to speak and you're indicating to second that proposal. Right, thank you for that. We've got some clarity. Councillor Calvert again.
Yeah, I was just going to speak not on what Councillor Edevan has just said, but what Councillor Wells said, which was about the fairing. And my own view on this is probably roughly where Councillor Edevan is. I would support the deferral if it gave you the opportunity to look at the whole viability issue, look at the mix of housing, the layout and design of the site. But I would be very surprised if deferral does allow that.
Thank you for that. Okay. Thank you. And Councillor Rediving again.
Just as an addendum to proposing it, I think what we have heard is that there is a degree of respect for the developers. They obviously have engaged with the local community, and that's been acknowledged. I guess, given the uncertainty here, if we do pass this tonight, I hope that they've been scribbling away and they actually go back to the community and talk about it with them and see what points can be, ironed out and alleviate people's concerns.
I think the applicant's got that message very clear. Councillor Thomas, and then we're going to make a decision.
If we're going to vote on that, Chair, would it be possible to include in the minutes Councillor Ediving's hope that the applicants would take away the conversation that's happened and all the points that have been raised by everybody to try to deal with some of the issues that have been raised, and also deal with the issues that have been raised by the Parish Council, which given the level of discontent and concern that there is, really, if that could be minuted, then I think it would be helpful.
I think that's a very good idea, Councillor Thomas, and I'm sure it can be. And I'm getting the nod here as well. So hopefully that's quite clear. Right, okay. Big decision. I mean, these are important decisions, and I apologise for the length if anyone's unhappy about the length of time it's taken, but it is important. But we do need to make a decision. We've had the recommendation, as per the report, moved by Councillor Edivine and seconded by Councillor Ellis. I think hopefully everyone will agree we had a good discussion on this, and we picked up a lot of points. So we got the recommendation. No other speakers. Let's have a show of hands. Those in favour of the recommendation, please show. So how many is that? 8. And anyone against? 1 against. And for the record, there's no abstention. So right. So permission is granted. I hope the applicants have picked up and heard what's been said tonight, and this committee will be taking a great interest as to how it all progresses. But can I thank everybody for your contributions and time on this one as well, because these are important decisions. So and we need to ask these questions. So thank you for that. Do you want to take a comfort break? Do you want a break? Do you want a 5-minute break? I think we've been sitting here for nearly 2 hours now. Can we have are we happy to have a 5 minutes if possible comfort break to stretch legs, and then we'll come back for the next application. Thank you. I'd assumed the YouTube had gone off, but it was still on. So the millions of people watching us will have seen us all wandering around. And anyway, never mind. So I think we're all back now. So thank you, everybody, colleagues. We'll come on to our next application now. Welcome back to councillors who stood down for that item. So this is Tithby, Holly Tree Farm, Cropwell Road, Tithby. Proposed residential conversion of brick-built threshing barn, cart shed and stable building, and the residential development of the balance of the former farm complex with 6 new dwellings, including landscaping, car parking and access works. Mr. Hilton, please, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. So the application relates to a collection of agricultural buildings and structures located to the south of Tithby, located between Cropwell Road and Tithby Road. So there's a collection of portal frame barns to the south and west of the site, and a more traditional red brick barn and cart shed to the northeast of the site. There are adjacent residential properties to the north fronting Cropwell Road. Site falls within the green belt. There are views from the west from a footpath running to the western side of the site. So just running through photos of the site. So this is the southernmost current agricultural field gate access to the site from Tithby Road. These are the barns towards the south of the site that are proposed to be demolished as part of the application. View looking south, another one looking south across the open countryside. This view shows the traditional brick barn to be retained and converted, the other buildings in the foreground to be demolished, and another structure within the centre of the site to be demolished. And then a view of the cart shed on the right-hand side to be converted to garages, and the barn on the left-hand side to be converted to a dwelling. And then another view looking west across the site, the structures to be demolished. And this is a view of the northernmost access from Tithby Road. And this is again the access point, which has become the primary access for the applications, or the only access for the application site. This is a view from Cropwell Road at the start of the public right-of-way, which runs west of the application site. And this is a view from the footpath looking across the site, looking eastward. So you can see in this photo, so it's a very rural setting. It's very open, dominated by the low agricultural buildings. So just looking at the application in more detail, seek planning permission for demolition of the more modern portal frame buildings, which are shaded dark grey on the layout plan. Retention of the lighter grey barn and cart shed that you can see towards the centre of the site, and the construction of 6 dwellings and the conversion of the barn to form a 7th dwelling. This plan shows the proposed layout. So just running in a clockwise direction around the site. So the scheme proposes a mix of contemporary dwellings of very sort of bespoke, unique styles, taking cues from the surrounding rural landscape. You've got sort of agricultural elements in each of the buildings here. So we've got let's have a look. So first plot 1, closest to Tithby Road here, and we've got a visual to show the same dwelling, 2-storey, 5-bed dwelling. Moving across, we've got plot 2. Again, we've got a visual of, there's some more, it's contemporary style, but it's clearly taking cues from the surrounding countryside. You've got this sort of timber-clad, almost agricultural style building attached to the dwelling. And then plot 3, again, in this visual on the left-hand side, you can see it is taking cues from the sort of agricultural structures on the site. Plots 4 and 5, more contemporary sort of timber-clad structures, as you can see here. And then plot 6, shown this visual, we've got again, contemporary style, but we're taking cues off from the sort of agricultural surrounding with the use of corten steel cladding. And then another visual of that. So as you can see, they're very unique, bespoke, sort of high quality designs. And then this is just the existing barn as it currently stands. And then these are the proposed conversion works, external works. So the main considerations are greenbelt, visual amenity and compliance with the spatial strategy. So starting with the spatial strategy, main consideration is policy 3 of the core strategy, which states that in settlements beyond the main built-up area of Nottingham and the identified key settlements, development will be for local needs only, delivered through small-scale infill or an exception site. Tivby is not identified as a key settlement for growth within the core strategy, nor is it identified as one of the other villages within the local plan part 2, which has the potential for growth. Officers are there of the view that the proposal would not comprise small-scale infill and the proposal would not therefore comply with policy 3 of the core strategy. It's considered the site would be development be car reliant and would not comprise a sustainable form of development given its relatively isolated location. Moving on to the consideration of visual amenity. So just looking back at this view from the footpath to the west, you can see the very open rural aspect and the agricultural nature of the buildings that are there. Whilst I don't deny that the buildings that are proposed are of a high quality bespoke design, they would introduce a clearly domestic built form in place of the current agricultural buildings, representing a domestic incursion into the countryside extending south beyond the current frontage along Cropwell Road. Therefore, officers are of the view that the replacement of the barns with dwellings would result in the loss of the agricultural character of the approach into Tivby and the rural character of the settlement. So moving on to what is probably the main point, the impact on greenbelt, appropriate development in the greenbelt. Paragraph 152 of the NPPF states that developments in the greenbelt should be regarded as inappropriate, which is by definition harmful and should not be approved except in very special circumstances. Paragraph 153 of the NPPF states that when considering any planning application, substantial weight should be given to any harm to the greenbelt. Very special circumstances will not exist unless the potential harm to the greenbelt by reason of inappropriateness and any other harm arising from the proposal is clearly outweighed by other considerations. So exceptions to inappropriate development are set out in paragraph 154 of the NPPF. Certain other forms of development listed under paragraph 155 are also not inappropriate, provided the openness is preserved and there's not a conflict with the purpose of clearing land within the greenbelt. So as detailed within the officer report, the conversion of the existing brick barn form dwelling would comprise the reuse of a building of permanent and substantial construction, and it would therefore comprise an exception to inappropriate development. However, with reference to the proposed new dwellings on plots 1 to 6, it is not considered that this element of proposal would comprise limited infill within the village, or that it would constitute the redevelopment of previously developed land, the definition of which within the NPPF excludes agricultural buildings. As the buildings are currently in an agricultural use, the proposed dwellings would not comprise the replacement of buildings in the same use as an exception to inappropriate development. It's therefore the view of officers that the proposal would not fall in exceptions to inappropriate development from paragraphs 154 and 155 of the NPPF, and as such it would comprise an inappropriate and therefore harmful form of development in the greenbelt. So openness is a key characteristic of the greenbelt. As detailed in the officer report, the proposed dwellings would be taller than the barns that they would replace, and there would be a greater spread of the built form south and southwest, as can be seen on this superimposed plan showing the existing barns in black and the proposed dwellings in red. As such, officers are of the view that the proposal would have a materially greater impact on the openness of the greenbelt than the existing buildings. So the applicants provided what they consider to be a number of very special circumstances, as detailed in paragraph 39 of the officer report. These include biodiversity enhancements, visual enhancements, and the fallback position of the extant permission on the site to convert the existing barns to dwellings. It should be noted that this previous permission has not been implemented, and therefore it can only be afforded very little weight in the consideration. Nevertheless, the scenario of the residential conversion has been considered, and if this were to take place, it would render the site previously developed land, as detailed in paragraphs 68 to 70 of the officer report. In this scenario, the previous permission for the residential conversion of barns, if this were to be implemented, and then this application were to subsequently come forward to demolish those converted barns and then construct the dwellings, officers are of the view that the current proposal would continue to represent an inappropriate form of development in the greenbelt, as the proposed dwellings would have a materially greater impact on the openness of the greenbelt than the barns they would replace in that scenario. So to summarise, officers are of the view that development would be harmful to the greenbelt by virtue of its inappropriateness and by virtue of the materially greater impact on the openness of the greenbelt. The proposal would give rise to wider harms, including the landscape impact and loss of agricultural character, along with the unsustainable nature of the site. Having considered the benefits of the scheme presented by the applicant, weighed up against the harms to the greenbelt and the totality of the other harms arising, it's not considered the application demonstrates very special circumstances that would clearly outweigh the harm arising. Accordingly, the application is before you with recommendation to refuse planning permission in line with the refusal reasons attached to the officer report.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. We have three speakers on this who have been very patient all evening. So our first speaker is Mr. Baisley, Nick Baisley, who's the agent for the applicant. And so, as you will have seen earlier on, you got up to 5 minutes to address the committee, and it will give you a 30-second warning if you're still speaking at 4.5 minutes. So as soon as you're ready, press the right-hand button and the red light will come on.
Thank you. My name is Nick Baisley. I'm a chartered town planner and an agent for the applicants. The applicants are local developers who specialise in high-quality, small-scale developments in rural villages. The site lies within the Greenbelt, and this is the principal cause for concern for your planning officers. On receipt of the application, your officers acknowledged the scheme as a high-quality one, but wondered how they might support it, given its location within the Greenbelt. In their words, had it not been for the Greenbelt, they would have been happy to approve the application in the countryside. However, whilst the Greenbelt location is acknowledged, this does not mean that the application should be automatically refused. The main attribute of greenbelts is their openness, achieved primarily by keeping land free from development. But of course, the application site is not currently free from development, and all those substantial buildings and extensive areas of hard standing and concrete enclosures necessarily already have an impact on the openness of the greenbelt. In this respect, it's important for members to be aware that the scheme has been deliberately devised to ensure that the combined footprint, floor space and volume of the proposed dwellings, new buildings, are less than those they will replace through redevelopment. And in doing so, the openness of the greenbelt will be increased rather than reduced as a consequence of the application proposals. Your officers raised conflict with the spatial strategy on the basis that TIFB isn't identified as a settlement for growth in the development plan, owing to the limited services within the village and the resultant reliance on the car. However, planning consent, of course, already exists for the same number of new households on the site, meaning that the proposed development is no less sustainable or appropriate in the village than the existing permission. And whilst Mr. Hilton said that little weight can be attached to the fallback because the consent hasn't been implemented, there is also been provided with a barrister's opinion that that isn't the case, and weight can be attached to that as the fallback. Essentially, what you have before you this evening is simply an alternative scheme to that already consented. In our view, the impact on the green belt will be less as a consequence of the smaller footprint, floor space and volume and extent of hard standing. But the benefits of the scheme over that approved go much, much further. And these benefits amount to what we consider to be very special circumstances, sufficient to clearly outweigh any harm caused by the green belt, which is the relevant test. What constitutes very special, sufficient very special circumstances is now down to you members of the planning committee. It's your judgment and decision, and only yours at this local level. If, having viewed the application and listened to those speaking in support of the scheme, you believe that there are very special circumstances, you're absolutely entitled to approve the application this evening. You'll note in any event, however, the absence of any objection to the application from either local residents, the parish council or statutory consultees. In our view, the very special circumstances here are most compelling. Planning consent already exists for development with a greater combined footprint, floor space and volume than now being applied for. The scheme before you will therefore increase rather than reduce the openness of the green belt, and this must be a good thing. The scheme before you also secures significant visual, environmental, landscape heritage and biodiversity enhancements, whether compared to the existing site or when compared against the planning consent that already exists. If there's any doubt as to the extent of such enhancements, members are invited to look again at the artist's impressions for the individual house types and the development overall, and compare these against what the existing site and buildings look like at the edge of this lovely village. To suggest that the proposed development wouldn't be redolent of a farmstead and would result in urbanisation and domestication of the site to the detriment of the landscape seems unfair and disingenuous. Indeed, officers have never raised any concerns regarding the proposed designs or their impact on the landscape during the application. The applicants have invested significantly in an award-winning architectural practice to devise a high-quality scheme redolent of a farmstead to ensure it was befitting the site and the surroundings, and one which secured an enhancement to the setting of the traditional buildings on the site, which are non-designated heritage assets. Your conservation area officer is also supportive of the application and clearly wouldn't be if she considered the proposal was not appropriate in this location in design terms. The applicants have also worked hard to secure a level of biodiversity net gain, which at 38% far exceeds the 10% mandatory requirement. They didn't need to do any of this, as they already have a consent for the residential conversion of the existing buildings with an overall greater floor space, which they're happy to build out. I must confess the current application was largely my doing, having encouraged the applicants to invest further in the site to create a better quality of design and overall environment that was possible with a consented scheme. Refusal of the application will simply result in the current scheme being built out, and I consider this a real opportunity missed. And that is why the circumstances surrounding this application are indeed very special. I do therefore hope members can see the value and benefits of this additional application and see fit to approve the application this evening, subject to any planning conditions.
Thank you very much. Bang on 5 minutes, so thank you for that. Our next speaker is Mr. Andrew Williams, who is from the Tithby and Witherton Parish meeting. So again, welcome to our committee. So as soon as you're ready, the right-hand button and the red light will come on.
Good evening, Chair and Councillors. My name is already been mentioned, Andy Williams. I'm the Chair of the Tithby and Witherton Parish meeting, and I'm here representing the views of the parish and our local residents. As recorded in the committee report, the parish meeting fully supports this application. There have been 10 letters of support from local residents, 1 neutral and no objection to the application whatsoever. I'm here this evening to tell the council that this application has really caught the imagination of our local community. In a world where people are so quick to object to most forms of new development, and particularly in small communities such as ours, where the impact of such development can be felt more, the fact that there have been no objections, and even more so, people have been taking the time and trouble to actually write in to support the application, in my view, is most telling. I read the committee report and must say I found it incredibly disappointing. Here is an opportunity to significantly improve upon the development which has already been approved under a different guise, but where the committee report seems to contrive harm to support its overall conclusions, no matter how illogical or unwarranted these conclusions appear. Members, you just have to To suggest the proposed development when compared to the existing condition of the site would be harmful to effect on the greenbelt and the landscape is quite incredible. You just have to look at the pictures of the existing buildings on the site to see what an eyesore the current site is. We as a parish objected to the applicant's previous proposals for the reuse of the existing buildings on the site, as we felt these buildings were unsuitable for conversion and would make a poor development. That application was universally disliked by the parish and the local residents, and yet your planning officers ignored our views and approved the developments anyway. Now that we finally have a scheme that we all love and think will be absolutely stunning and where we are fully in support, your planning officers are wanting to refuse it. Your planning officers seem obsessed with wanting to keep Tidby as a semi-derelict farm hamlet. The existing permission grants planning consent for 6 new households on the site and can be implemented and built on by the same developments at any time. However, we believe the proposed development is a far superior scheme to that currently approved and will deliver many benefits to the village, not least bringing new life into the community, as well as securing significant enhancements to this part of Tidby, including landscape, biodiversity, heritage and environmental enhancements will absolutely all positive impact on the village. In our view, the quality of the architecture and build form is quite clearly much better than the current approval, where all the buildings are crammed tightly to each other and against the traditional barns, which under that consent are left derelict. The application before you provides greater space about buildings, enhancing the setting of the traditional barns on the site and creating a much better living environment for future occupants. We consider the replacement of 2 access with a single access a further benefit to the scheme and allows the creation of a most attractive farm courtyard type development, which we consider is absolutely befitting location. Whilst you understand that the site lies within the greenbelt, this is obviously not an undeveloped open site devoid of any buildings. The existing buildings and hardstanding already have an impact on the openness of the greenbelt, and we consider the proposed scheme, which is a smaller footprint and much less hardstanding, will self-evidently have less of an impact on the openness of the existing site. In such circumstances, we struggle to see the harm arises to the greenbelt or to the landscape. On the one hand, your planning officers describe the design of each of the proposed dwellings as typical of those found on a farmstead, but on the other hand, conclude the proposal will cause harm to the landscape, describing it as introducing an urbanising and domestic character to the street scene rather than reflecting the agricultural character of the site and surroundings. Even when comparing against the current site and the existing untidy buildings on it, I find this a most difficult proposition to comprehend. The benefits of this scheme over that currently approved seem so obvious. The parish are dumbfounded as regards some of the conclusions within the committee reports reporting to them. It's not often that a planning application brings a community together, but that is exactly what happened here. We feel the application is quite special in this respect, and we would therefore urge members to please to approve the application this evening, subject to any planning conditions. And on this basis, there are very special circumstances. In this instance, we believe justify the grant of planning permission on this site within the green belt. Whilst the applicants could obviously appeal if the application is refused, an appeal which we think they could win quite easily, our fear is they will simply revert to building out the current scheme, which they already have planning permission for, and which we would see as a major opportunity missed. Please, therefore, support our community in getting the developments it prefers and deserves. We have no doubt that this will be a high-quality development, the likes of which we've not seen anywhere else within the smaller communities within the borough. We believe this will help raise the standard of design in rural areas, and we're most proud to support it. Thank you for your time, and I hope common sense prevails.
Thank you. Thank you for your time as well. So that's 5 minutes. Thank you very much. And then finally, we have the ward member, Councillor Birch. So, Councillor Birch, you know how that works. So, as soon as you're ready, you can talk to us.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, councillors. And firstly, apologies for the lateness of my email that I sent out. I was ill over the weekend. I had hoped to send it a bit earlier to you, but hopefully you've had time to look at it. I would like to begin by reiterating my respect for the Greenbelt and to recognise its vital importance. The openness of the countryside must be protected. We must do everything we can to ensure that large and overbearing buildings do not negatively affect the openness of our beautiful countryside. I've called in this application exactly for that reason. What we have before us tonight is a wonderful opportunity to vastly increase the openness of the countryside, whilst at the same time accept a design scheme which is far superior to what is currently on the table. The application before you substantially decreases the volume of the buildings on the site, therefore increasing the openness of the countryside, whilst providing a design which is far more in keeping with a quaint country village like Tidby. Instead of towering, overbearing buildings, which can be seen from miles away, we have much smaller and proportional properties in general. Instead of sprawling concrete hardstanding, we have large gardens and green spaces. Instead of ugly industrial-looking barn conversions, we have beautiful home designs. I'm also delighted to see the huge biodiversity net gain on offer, which is nearly quadruple the mandatory requirements. I think this shows great conscientiousness and respect for the local area by the developer. This is a once-in-a-lifetime chance for an exciting and beautiful development in Tivby. It would be so heart-wrenching to see the opportunity wasted, especially considering the huge amount of local support. I have been overwhelmed by the amount of public support for this application. There's not been one single objection, and every resident I've spoken to has supported it. I also note that the Tivby and Wyverton Parish Council also passionately supports it, and all of the surrounding parishes support the application too. In conclusion, I believe that the benefits of this application far outweigh the harm to the openness of the countryside and the Greenbelt. There are very special circumstances here, namely the reduction in the volume of the buildings compared to what is there, and the high quality of the design, as well as the fantastic biodiversity net gain. I hope that you agree with me that this is a beautiful development, and it will be hugely positive for the openness of the countryside, for Tivby Village, and for Rushcliffe Borough. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Birch. Thank you very much. So we've heard from our three speakers who are all speaking in support of the application for the reasons we've just heard, making points such as the design. They've been designed in such a way that the overall footprint will be smaller than existing buildings. Reminded us there is planning permission for conversion of the existing, but the supporters feel that these alternatives are preferable, as we've heard. So do you want to come back on any of those points, please, Mr. Taylor? And, sorry, Mr. Hilton. Sorry, change your name then. Beg your pardon.
Thank you, Chairman. So I think, first of all, I want to start with the point raised about the impact on the openness of the Greenbelt versus the existing buildings. Clearly, when you look at what's on site, they are of quite sizable massing. Concern here is, firstly, the proposed dwellings would be taller than the existing structures. So although there is a reduced footprint overall of the buildings, they would be taller. And I think the second point is, despite the reduced footprint, they would be of a greater spread. So buildings would be extending further southward and further southwest within the site, with dwellings in the current sort of open concrete enclosure to the southwest of the site. So in that sense, the spread of the built form would be greater. So in terms of the MPPF is very clear cut. As you can see, in this case, there is a very strong support for the high quality design of the scheme, but the very special circumstances have to clearly outweigh the harms arising to the Greenbelt and any other harms. It's a very clear cut policy. It's it's very black and white in that sense. The previous scheme, despite the comments that have been made, it was Greenbelt compliant. That's the fundamental point here, because it comprised the reuse of buildings of a substantial construction. And in terms of the impact or the loss of, the visual appearance, the residential design guide refers to agricultural buildings, agricultural conversions, retaining the agricultural qualities and working within the constraints of such buildings. Appreciate these are sort of portal frame buildings rather than anything of a sort of higher quality, but nevertheless replace them with standard dwelling or with dwellings would change the overall sort of rural approach to the village, the rural aspect. And would introduce a clearly domestic element in place of the current barns.
Thank you. Much of which was in the report anyway. So, Councillor Ellis, first of all, please.
Thanks, Chair. I have to say that I agree with the three speakers. I can see no reason whatsoever to refuse this application.
Well, that's short and to the point, isn't it? Thank you. So right, who was first? Was it Councillor Thomas? I think you went first, didn't you? Then Councillor Eddy, and then Councillor Manager.
Yeah, thank you. I think the point here is that you can't put up buildings in the green belt, but there is an exception, which is reusing existing buildings, which is what the previous application has been able to take advantage of. This application is not reusing previous buildings. So however much you approve of the design or like the buildings, it's actually not an exception as the other one was. And therefore I support the officer recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So two opposing views straight away, and then we have Councillor Edivine and then Councillor, who put the hand up just then? Oh, sorry, Councillor Walker.
I think basically, and I've been involved in a number of discussions over the years on planning in the green belt, and sometimes it's absolutely daft, but you can't just go and build something in the green belt. And it's not the job of this committee to rewrite the rules on how the green belt is implemented. So no matter what you think of the design, I really can't support this as a, and I know that's disappointing with the people who've spoken passionately on it, but the green belt is the green belt. Only 2 months ago, we decided on another matter, and I know we're not here to consider that, but we were very adamant that just what was described as a scrubby little bit of land was still in the green belt. And if it's in the green belt, then it has to meet the requirements of building in the green belt. And I just don't think this does.
I did see Councillor Manager's hand go up before Councillor Walker, so we'll have Councillor Manager and then Councillor Walker, please.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Ellis, I'm afraid. I think that there's
you're not afraid.
Well, but there's some other people that don't agree, which is a shame, because the green belt is really to prevent urban sprawl from mainly in this particular case Derby and Nottingham, and from one city to another. I think it gets a bit ridiculous when it comes from very, very small developments in villages where there's clearly overwhelming support for this development, and it's very well thought out. I'm particularly impressed with the 40%, I think that is 4 times 10% biodiversity net gain on this site. And, Greenbelt is supposed to be a green space, and this is not a green space. It is a space that's got hard standing, and it's got buildings on it that aren't, that are metal and other old barns that are no longer viable. So therefore, to replace them with attractive places to live seems eminently sensible for me. To me, and I know it's very difficult, and that the planning officers have to just obey the rules. But as the agent said, you can go against that, and that's what we're here for. That's why it's been brought to committee. And there's been a little bit of talk about just no public transport, which I'm sure there isn't. I must admit I didn't look into that, but I have looked into the cycle route. It's only 8 minutes to that shop that's in Cropwell Bishop on a bike, and I've looked at the roads and they're not that bad. It's not like some of the routes that are suggested. So I think it is possible to be relatively sustainable from that point of view, and it would provide more people living in this village, but not too many. So it's a very attractive alternative to what is there, and what is there is not enhancing the green belt. So, if I don't know whether there's going to be a proposal to accept the recommendation, But if there isn't anyone who's about to do that, I'm quite happy to propose the other way with suitable conditions worked out by the officers.
Right, thank you. Well, yes. Well, I can ask actually at this stage if you've got a seconder for that proposal. So, Councillor Ellis, you're seconding that, but I've still got some speakers to go. So we've made a note that you might want to. I heard what you say about conditions suggested by officers. I think it would be very helpful if you could give some thought to conditions there. I think it's only fair, isn't it? Are you wanting to come on? Oh yes. Oh yes. Sorry, and of course I didn't allow you to come back, did I? Sorry about that. So Mrs. Dodd, and then Matt, and then I'll go back to the council.
Thank you, Chairman. It's just a point of legislation. Because the site lies within the green belt, because it is inappropriate development, and because it's over 1,000 square metres of floor space, we can't. Should a motion to approve be successful tonight, we can't actually grant permission this evening. We'll have to refer it to the Secretary of State. So you would, your motion would be to give a delegated authority to officers to refer, and provided the Secretary of State doesn't call it in, we could then grant permission at that point. So just point on the legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I must admit, that had gone over my head. So if permission was granted tonight, it doesn't mean that the permission is automatically granted. So yeah, that's very helpful. Mr. Hilton, do you want to come back? I'm sorry I didn't call you back in soon. Sorry about
that. Thank you, Chairman. So just to come back on Councillor Marlin's point about the purpose of the green belt and to avoid the amalgamation of towns. I just want to draw members' attention to the 5 purposes of the green belt. I'm sure we've been over this several times, but paragraph 143 of the NPPF. So it's not just about preventing the merging of town, but also criterion C, assisting in the safeguarding of the countryside from encroachment. So clearly there is that consideration that we need to look at rather than just preventing the merging of suburban sprawl. So just really wanted to reiterate that point.
Okay, thank you. That's very clear. So who was next? It was Councillor Calvert. Please. And then are you indicating this? Yeah, and then so Councillor Calvert and then Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the green belt is an extremely rigid policy tool, and in this case, it's riding roughshod over local opinion. But in Councillor Edivon's camp, I'm afraid a green belt policy is green belt policy, and I can't see how this development could meet the requirements, the very special requirements for us to agree to it.
Okay, thank you. Probably no need to, that's very clear. No need to come back on that with Councillor Walker.
Thank you, Chair. I'm very sorry to be asking this, particularly in light of what I'm going to go on to say specifically about what Councillor Calvert's just said. But I feel, whilst I feel honour bound to do it anyway, I thought it was a bit unusual. My question is about whether or not the proceedings here have been in order. I thought it was a little bit unusual to have all 3 speakers to the item all speaking in favour of it, all basically on the same side. I had a quick look at the standing orders here, and it says that applications for the consideration of this meeting are presented. For each application, the planning officer presents. There's an opportunity for the applicant to speak. There's an opportunity for a representative of any objectors to speak. And there's an opportunity for the relevant ward councillor to speak. So I don't think we've sort of followed that accurately. I am sorry to, because I am going to go on to say something, but I felt, having thought about that, I ought to mention it for the benefit of the record and the benefit of the proceedings.
Yeah, that's fine. We'll take advice, some legal advice on that. But while we're looking that up,
surely it's an objector to the recommendation.
Well, that is right.
It is not an objector to the application.
No, it's an objection to the recommendation.
That would apply in most cases. Let's face it, because it would be that most people would object to the application. But in this case, it's
It is most unusual indeed to have a situation where every visitor who has asked to speak is of the same mind.
Yeah.
It's unusual.
I have seen it before, though.
I'm sure we have seen
with
it.
With this kind of one where the application is being refused, but most people in the community support it.
It could be argued that whatever ones, if you had three people speaking against or three people speaking in favour, the chances are the same points. I'm not being patronising here, but the same points are probably being made by different speakers. But do you want to help us on this, Ms. Walker?
I think Councillor Manager makes a valid point that in fact Mr. Williams was objecting to the recommendation.
Okay, I'm glad we got over that, because what material? Oh, somebody's still on, I think. Am I back on? So I think it's clear, and everybody's agreed that the application represents inappropriate development in the green belt. It's not limited infill, and we're not using previously developed land. So we then fall to, are there very special circumstances? And as the presentation and the discussions were going on, I was sort of thinking, Miss Beasley telling us, well, scheme's a bit better, and the values and benefits, but I was thinking, are these really very special circumstances? But then we heard from Mr. Williams, and some of the things that I wrote down convinced me that yes, there are very special circumstances. This has caught our imagination. It's brought our community together. Most tellingly, our fear is that they'll build the current scheme. So that was what convinced me that, okay, yes, happy to go along with that, notwithstanding that I think Mr. Hilton very accurately laid out the policy position in my eyes. So those are the reasons that I'm inclined to support Councillor Manander and Councillor Ellis's proposal.
Councillor Ellis.
Chair, I think it really turns upon not whether we're actually transgressing the national guidelines. It turns upon whether we think there are exceptional circumstances or not, and the legislation provides for that. So, to answer Councillor Everdeen and Calvert and Thomas, the green belt isn't protected 100%. There is the allowance for a planning committee to make a judgment as whether a particular project is exceptional and therefore allowable in the green belt or not. And I think this is clearly where the exception rule comes in. So I would hope that my fellow councillors don't allow a misunderstanding of the legislation to override their common sense.
Okay, I'm sure all councillors, whatever their view, whether they're in favour of something or against, have plenty of common sense. But I understand what you're saying. Councillor Eddyman, you want to come back?
Yeah, I know this is difficult, but the principle to me is, and I know there's been a comment made about the fear of the existing permission being implemented. But basically, and whether this was greenbelt or open countryside, I wouldn't support it because it's open countryside, and we shouldn't just be building in open countryside or greenbelt. And if you've got a barn conversion, and it can sometimes make a belief that it's been given permission prior approval, to then just say, well, we don't like that, so we'll knock it down and build 6 houses instead. You may as well just knock down the barn conversion and build 6 houses. That's my, and that's why I'm And I just think that if we grant this, and okay, if we grant it, it goes to the Secretary of State for calling. So it's not right. You've got planning permission, so we're not actually granting planning permission by approving it. But I just, I don't think we are getting into the realms of protecting policy versus common sense. I just think that we are allowing things that open the door for other developments if you allow this.
Yes, yeah, I understand that. Again, though, as we heard earlier on, we can't speculate as to what might happen elsewhere. We just have to concentrate on this application. Councillor Brown and then Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Edivine and Councillor Calvert. Greenbelt is Greenbelt, and we should support the Greenbelt policies that we have here. Mr. Williams said that it will bring the villages all for it, but turn that around when we've been discussing Greenbelt before, when the villages have been against it. Think about that one. But I will not support the application.
Thank you. And Councillor Thomas.
I was just going to say I've sat in many planning commission committees where we've been discussing barn conversions, and in almost all those cases, in the Greenbelt, they would have wanted to knock them down and rebuild them, but they were allowed to do what they were doing because they were reusing an existing building, because that is an exception. And, that's where I stand really. I think we have to think about the precedent that we're setting if we do this.
Okay, thank you. Probably no need to come back on that. Councillor Malander wants to come back there.
We're told over and over again not to consider setting a precedent.
Yes.
That is quite a common thing, because quite a lot of residents will say, oh, this means that everybody will be able to do it. And we're constantly told, no, that is not the case. Every single planning application is decided upon its merits. And that is what we should be thinking about this. And for those that are look at on Google Maps, this is a built-up site. It's not open countryside. And this application is suggesting 40% increase in biodiversity. And unfortunately, most farmland could probably do with a 40% increase in biodiversity. It's actually that scrubland that someone mentioned earlier that's much better for biodiversity. So therefore, it's not that if you look at in the difference between what's proposed and what's there now, what's there actually now, even though they're agricultural buildings and therefore allowed in the Greenbelt, they are building on something that's already there and something that is already built up. So it's almost the same as just converting the barn. It's using the other spaces to build dwellings instead of defunct farm buildings.
Thank you. And Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I went to this site, and I wouldn't call it a village. It's more like a hamlet. And where the road where they want to build is so narrow, one of the farmers kept driving up and down in his Land Rover Discovery, and it filled the whole road. I did speak to 3 residents, and they were quite happy with the 6 houses, but they were concerned that if this committee did pass these 6 houses, what would happen to the rest of the field? So I would ask the officers, if it did get passed, would it include that they could build on the rest of the field? Thank you.
Well, yes. Can we answer that? I would have thought that there would probably be conditions along the lines of not no further development or no other development without possible future permission. I suspect that's the answer, but am I right in that?
So in terms of the red line area of the site, members could look to put conditions on to remove permitted development rights for outbuildings. Anything over and above that would be subject to a separate application. Chairman, could I just come back on another point that was raised earlier? I just wanted to clarify in terms of when members are thinking about these agricultural buildings and the fact that they are there, which we know they are, agricultural land is not previously developed land. It's very clearly defined in the National Planning Policy Framework. So you cannot consider it in the same way as you would other land with buildings on because it is agricultural land. So we just need to bear that in mind when we're thinking about what's there on the site at the moment. And then my final point would just be to reiterate the National Greenbelt Policy, and particularly paragraph 148, which talks about when considering planning applications, local planning authorities should ensure that substantial weight is given to any harm to the Greenbelt. So members have had a good discussion today on what the very special circumstances would be. I would just remind members that you've got substantial weight on the harm side. Are you satisfied that your very special circumstances are outweighing that balance before you come to any conclusions? Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the members are going to make that decision. But yes, Councillor Ellis.
What are these major harms?
Sorry, say again.
What are these massive harms?
So that is how it is defined within Greenbelt policy.
Yes, but what is the demonstration that there will be any harm to the village or the countryside or anybody else?
It is defined in national policy that inappropriate development is by definition harmful to the Greenbelt. So it's always your starting point.
Councillor Walker.
Just one last thing on me, and then I'll pipe down. But we talk about balance. So I think Councillor Ellis's point about the level of harm is important, right? Because the more harm we've got, the greater the amount or the amount or strength of very special circumstances you need to overcome that harm. By contrast, the lower the level of harm, the lower the level of very special circumstances needed to overcome that harm. So you've got site A with a very high level of harm to the Greenbelt, for whatever reason that may be. You've got site B with limited harm to the Greenbelt, for whatever reasons they may be. You need different levels of very special circumstances to overcome them. So I think I'm with Councillor Ellis when he's determined, on the basis of what we've seen here, there is limited harm to the Greenbelt.
And of course, there is also the opinion of the decision makers for us as committee members to decide to agree or disagree on what is harm and so on. So that is a situation. Do you want to come back on that, or is I think there's probably nothing else to add to that? Right. This is a really interesting application and a set of circumstances, isn't it? Because we've got the record, we've had the report, we've had the visitor speakers, all of whom were in favour of the applicant, so consequently against the recommendation in the report. But we do have a situation now where we have had a recommendation moved by Councillor Mallender and seconded by Councillor Ellis to grant planning permission, which I think we need to make. I don't see anyone else wishing to speak, so I think we need to make a decision on this. And conditions wise, I'm sure you've had some thoughts, and I'm sure officers have had thoughts as well. Do we want to discuss those conditions before we go to the vote on this, or no? We just go. So we're going to go to a vote now, and to make it clear what we're voting on Councillor Mallender's proposal to grant planning permission. So, colleagues, who is in favour of that? Please show your hands. 4. And anyone against? 7. And no abstentions. Okay, so that motion falls. So we're now back to the original motion, which Councillor Reddy.
So obviously, conversely to that, I'd like to propose that we accept the officer's recommendation and refuse permission.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a seconder for that, please?
I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Councillor Brown is the first hand I saw. Right, so the recommendation, the proposal now is to refuse permission as per the original report. Show of hands in favour of that, please. Okay, and those again, 7, and those against. 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. Okay. So permission is refused as per the report. I would thank everybody for their input on this. And as with any planning application, there will be people who are pleased with the decision and people against. But it's one of those. It is one of those things. So, but I think we gave it a good discussion. So, thank you. That's the final planning application on this evening's item agenda. But there is one other thing I just need to inform colleagues, members of, and I'm going to embarrass Mrs. Dodd now. Mrs. Dodd is this is her final planning meeting here at the borough because, as most of you probably know, you are moving on, aren't you, to Nottinghamshire County Council? So you're not leaving the authority just yet, are you? But the way the calendar falls, this is the final planning meeting, isn't it? So certainly, I wish you all the best and thank you for your work, both professionally with the officers, but also the advice that you've given to me and colleagues and councillors over the years. So thank you for that. Good luck. And so we will bring the meeting to a close now. It's 8:55. So thank you everybody for your contributions. And again, difficult decisions this evening. It's an old cliche, isn't it? But that's what we're here to do. And I hope even people who don't agree with the decisions we've taken tonight, I hope people will understand that we've given very fair hearings to all sides of the argument.